Please. Started a panic.
That's only if we want to be recorded, right?
That's true. Oh, you will be recorded. You just won't have your audio recorded. You're good.
Thanks, Jerry.
The last meeting
No,
was
nothing
fading in
getting
and
by.
out.
Oh, was it?
Get about 5 seconds, and then you lose it for 5 seconds. So
It was cut pretty bad.
yeah,
Oh.
ones with sitting closer to the mic, it'd pick up pretty good. And then the rest of them, it was
See, the mics downstairs are different corners of the room.
We were in line for a Dodgers
So,
game, and the
it's
gal in
supposed
front of
to
me,
pick
there's
up
two gals in front of me, and
all
the guy
areas
came out
of
of the
the
Dodgers
room,
stadium,
no
like,
matter where
giving
you're
all the
sitting.
instructions. If your ticket
So I
says
guess if
this,
you're
you're in this
sitting
line. If
at
it's
the
over here,
lower,
then you gotta go this.
it takes
And they're
you
looking at
better.
each other, signing back and forth. Cause they, yeah, man, they don't know what he's saying. And she turns around, she looks at me, and I'm
I think they
like, 1
put
second.
this in
I'm like,
just last year.
hold on. And so I'm listening to him, and then I go back, and so I'm signing to her, and she signs back, and she's like, thank you, thank you, thank you. And I was like, hey, sign language from college a long time ago. I still remember some of it.
Huh.
So that was my signing experience.
Cool.
That's it.
Maybe it's just a bad connection. Usually they're pretty good. Because I listen in on the board meetings.
I am a Braves and
So they usually have like the finance committee meeting down there.
I can.
No listening on that.
I'm not a Red
Usually
Sox.
they're pretty good. It's been a hit and miss.
It's been a sad 2 games.
It's like being you and a BYU.
Oh no,
Oh wait, that's me.
no. Everybody
I
knows
went to both schools.
that I bleed red.
Oh, I can't sit at this end of the table. Got my blue shirt on today.
Okay.
We won rugby last night. Made up for the terrible football game.
I don't think
He's gonna come get us started.
She is, yeah.
No.
It's only 12:57. I think we're waiting for
Oh,
one of the other
was you?
superintendents.
Really?
Oh, let's see,
How many
so superintendent
hours are still
Rogers, he's not
not
gonna
quite
make it.
finalized?
So,
Everybody is certified. Now we're just going through checking for little errors here and there.
I'm supposed to be at this meeting. My phone told me so.
Can you hear?
Carrie hasn't kicked me out.
I think that'll load me 24. Launch your browser and go to loader up. Okay, let's fix all this. Loader again. Okay, let's fix this.
One day we'll have it down to science where it works out good.
Yeah, I'll get a little cleaner on our side too. So. Goes a little smoother.
Now that all the validation, I mean,
Yeah,
once you fix it this year, next year,
Yeah.
I assume it should just be pretty smooth. Yeah.
It should be.
do that wrong this year.
Yeah. It was big this year. You'd upload it, and then you'd have 4 or 5 things to fix, and then you'd fix those and upload it.
Yeah, this year was a little rough, and I think we could have been a little more clear.
Yeah.
I know, even testing the prior year's file ahead of time.
And Vaughn had me do that, which I was glad for. My biggest issue was I fixed everything, all the validations really early on based on my budget. So then when I submitted the actual, there were still lingering accounts out there that didn't get fixed, that for whatever reason didn't get fixed on the budget.
Yeah,
So-
you always have more things in the house.
Yeah, they didn't do the budget. Yeah. So I wish I would have earlier on uploaded an actual file instead of a budget file.
Yeah. And then everybody doing it the week before. That's what shut us down. That's what shut everybody down.
Type in the 10 to 7
But
And we worked with everybody that was struggling. They called it.
Yeah.
struggling with this. Okay. I mean, I think it was just last Thursday. We received Jordan grants.
Is there anybody on the line?
Hello? Is there anyone on the phone?
Oh, you need to get on the network first, huh?
Oh, you didn't figure
Superintendent Ray, can you hear me?
He's calling again. Yeah.
Superintendent Ray, can you hear me?
Can you get the screen download?
Can you hear me, sir? Can you text me? Superintendent Ray, can you hear me, sir?
It sounds like a submarine.
Only 2 minutes. It's gonna be really loud.
Someone doesn't yell out, die.
October, you guys 7 months or something?
Yeah, something. Take you one
Does somebody have Superintendent Ray's phone number? That, like, the cell phone number I can text him on. You see, it looks like he's on, but I can't hear it.
Ray,
Yeah.
Oh, same.
I just don't have a cell phone number for him.
Take away.
I mean, I'll give you more of these so we can go get them in.
Come on, where that's coming out of 435.
They keep saying one thing, but I just.
Yeah, just, if you can, maybe text him and ask him if he can hear us, but we can't hear him.
That's the most honest thing I've ever.
Yeah, 462.
If you guys think I couldn't do it sneakily, I could, but I'm not doing it.
That is good.
You can quote him. Way more copies of this than the other one. Hi, Jerry.
Because it's the most important.
What?
It's the most important.
They're ordered. Pat sent him one.
Here's the statute. You can have a call number or I have to set up a bridge. I didn't set up a bridge for this. I can set one up, but your YouTube will go down for at least 10 minutes. Let's see how good.
Yeah, so I can use mine.
Supposed to have 2. Agenda and the rules.
Do you guys have, does everybody have a copy of the rule and the statute and the agenda?
Got the code, not the rule. Let me see that. That's the code.
Here, I can make some more. I made like 20, there should be plenty.
This is the rule.
That's the rule.
This is the code.
The code's on the single page, the rules.
Dale's got
Was
it.
yours stapled?
The
rules.
statute is stapled. Right?
The rule.
That one didn't get.
Or you pull it up.
There's always an option. I like to write on mine, so. Good.
Appreciate you coming yesterday.
Code. We didn't get the rule over on this side.
Jamie is making copies of.
We have the.
Code.
We have lots of statute.
Yeah. We didn't get the.
Is anyone missing the statute? We have a pile of statute down here.
Jamie's copying the rule.
Go
I don't have enough
fish.
rule.
Yeah. That's what we ran out of. We have the.
You have two singles, and a stapled copy.
Yeah. That's what they ran out
I
of.
have extra copies of the board rule if you want to.
That's what. That's this side over here didn't get the board rule.
you.
Thank you very much.
You got one? Anyone else?
Right here. Or did you get it? If there's another copy, I'll have it.
Oh, yeah. Sure. Sorry, Brett. Thank you. We're trying to get Superintendent Ray on the line before we start. He wanted to call in today. So, and Superintendent Scott Rogers from Tooele, his father passed away, so he won't be joining us today. He's out of town. So we let him know we'd catch him up when he gets back.
The recordings are good stuff, so.
You can't fall asleep at night. You just turn them on.
Yeah, you just jump in and listen.
Financial Operations YouTube channel.
You know. It's a full chilled Diet Coke activity, but
There's enough episodes out there, you can just start from the first one and let them run.
episode. That's exciting.
We do.
Oh, yeah.
Not a few more.
Yeah, we got seasons now.
Move apartments or something.
Not,
It's not, yeah.
closer it got to,
Scott, Superintendent Ray wants us to call this number.
closer it
You know,
got.
Or through.
I don't, you know,
I don't know if he wants me to yell at him.
Shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. What's to stop them from taking it back to girls again anyway?
Absolutely.
There's absolutely nothing
Well,
to
there's
stop
no-
them from doing that.
there's no protections against,
No, there isn't. So you can say it's for education today. 2 years from now, it's going back to girls.
That's why Ben said yesterday very clearly, immediately. Did you pick up on that one?
Who said that?
I mean, they can change it, you know, what they want.
Sorry.
That's the way we work, I guess. Not saying they will.
In the short term, the sentiment there is to desire to use it on education. In the long term, anything can happen.
Yes, can you connect me with Superintendent Ray, please? He's expecting my call. This is Scott from the Utah State Board of Education for a meeting. Thank you.
The bunch of, these people aren't running for it, these people aren't running for different reasons.
Mike.
It has to be no
Sir, this is Scott. Can you hear us okay? We're in the NESS meeting. You're on an open
yes,
line.
Yes, I can. Thank you for connecting me.
Okay.
The phone number I was given didn't work.
Understood.
Thank you for contacting me.
Yes, sir. Understood. It just was a mix-up with our IT, so we have everybody around the table. We have you on the line, so we'll go ahead and get started.
Okay.
Thank you for your help.
Yes, sir.
Okay, I don't know how much of this ground we'll actually cover today because it's a lot of information, but we wanted to put an agenda together and see how much we can get through. Our first agenda item is to have Dee come through. Dee, I understand, did a presentation at the Small Rural Schools meeting where you talked through information about the regression and showed how you were able to adjust it. So we wanted to give you some time to show us this group the same presentation that you provided them.
Okay. So this is just a summary page. Have your total distributed out right here.
So are you using the current allocation from currently?
This is a couple of years old, so the numbers are a little lower than currently.
Okay.
Yeah. It should work the same. So on each of the formula sheets, down here in the formula, there's a percentage on each of these factors. So all I did was link those three fields to this field right here. So across all, is there 5 sheets or whatever? Just link those percentages all to this one. And so the prior year you had $29,456,000 distributed. You now have $30 million to distribute. You just plug that in and go here to what if analysis, the goal seek, and you tell it increase the formulas to 30 million total distributed by changing this one percentage. It will affect all the formulas. Okay, and there we have $30 million to the penny distributed to all the schools. So fairly simple. That's all it would take to, just based on percentage, increase all the formulas and push the money out. So we don't have any left to carry over.
So it just pushes the money back. It doesn't do anything to fix the underlying problem with the regression formulas. Right.
So yeah, it's not changing the formulas.
So it's assuming what was done back in 2013 is still valid back in 2018, 2019.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, just using these current formulas. So I did take just those two scenarios, one of the formulas, and so the bottom curve, you can see kind of the purple line was with the 29.5 million. We add 500,000 to the across all the formulas, and this one bumped up by that little green line. So you can see over here on the left, even the smallest schools, there was a small increase there, and all the way up through. It does get back to zero at the top end. So that's kind of how much, gives you a little feel for how much that would change. So that's kind of what we looked at, is just how those formulas work. I think one other question, as I listened in on the recording, I think Ben suggested that maybe the formulas have a declining value. Smaller schools, the smaller they are, they get more WPUs, and that's beautifully built right into the formulas here.
I guess my only question here is that assumes that the underlying formulas are correct. And we have no basis on which to prove that they are. Right?
I think a lot of that would go back to what Todd brought up last time. What's the intent of the formula? Was it purely just, here's your pot of money, let's distribute it? Or was it built on some cost basis? And I think it was originally here, it's a distribution formula. The legislation said, here's your pot of money we're going to give you.
But I think you want to have that based on something.
So as I've looked at it, I don't think it was ever created with any kind of regression type analysis. In regression, if I understand right, you chart out this data and you get this kind of cloud, and then you chart somewhere where you want to hit that. I don't think that applies in this situation. I don't think it was ever done. The legislature said, create a formula to distribute this money. Start with 10 at the bottom, get back to zero at 600 or 450 or whatever, depending on your size, and then create as you look at it, it's a nice curve. And so the data that's in here, these little points that are plotted, are just a few comparisons to say, okay, is this working for the schools that are out there? It's a pretty small sample even at that. But for the most part, for all these on here, they're spending more than what the curve shows. This whole chart is way outdated, I'm sure. So a small sample was done to say, okay, yeah, looks valid that these schools at least are spending a lot more than what the formula is providing.
But is spending even part of this? Because the chart has weighted people units, and what's the bottom or the
Yes, so
horizontal
what people like is number of students at that school. So as you grow in size, the number of WPUs, and your WPUs decrease until you completely drop off at the top.
Hey Dee, will you do me a favor? See that blue dot at the top that's supposed to represent bluff? Will you hover over that? What are I can't see that. What are the values in there? Is it 82 and 205 or
205,
82.
Okay.
Yeah.
334.
Okay. I'll show you what we kind of have been looking through.
So I agree with Chad that I think having regression in here is a misnamed formula. This is not a regression formula, it's a distribution formula. We ought to change the name and call it that.
Do you wanna hop off for a second? I'll show you some of the things that we've been looking at this week. If you're done, I don't want to interrupt you if you're not finished.
Oh, that's great.
You hop off and I'll show you what we've been digging.
How do I
Just kill that page.
let's close this?
Yeah.
Close that.
Close it.
You have a little box that should say stop, pause.
So most of the formulas at the bottom, you start at about 4 extra WPUs per student, and then that slowly declines through 3, 2, 1, 0 at the very top. Then you get down to a tenth of a WPU per student, or to 0 as you hit the maximum. So that's why it's a curve, is that declining value.
Maybe I wrote it on.
There's several columns of data in there, but once you sort them out, you can see all that's just WPUs, and it's not that bad of a formula in the end.
Sorry, I was thinking about it. There we go. Okay. So, I think that this is the most recent distribution from the current year that we're distributing on now, right? And we did exactly the same thing that you did. We went back through and we performed the same thing, adjusting the percentages like you indicated. We also started doing a little formula tracking. So a couple things that I just wanted to bring to the group's attention. You can see over here that I think we 100% agree that these are outputs of a regression analysis, and nothing really changes on an annual basis unless you change that percentage. So when we started looking through the formula and got to where D got, sorry, I'm dialing around a lot here. When we got to where D got, what we were trying to figure out is, see this 109%? I believe that's the factor that you adjusted as well, right?
Yeah.
We were trying to figure out what that represents. 109% of we think it's 109% of this WPU factor. See this 645, 37, 18, this number over here? This is representative, and this rolls over into your WPU factor. And what we noticed as we went through the different tables is that we're using a different factor for every, we're using a different WPU factor for every scenario. So that first regression was elementary. This one is the first and second year secondary school regression. It's using a different factor. The 3-year secondary is using, I think, the same factor as the first and second. Is that right? Nope, it's a little bit different. It's close, but it's a little bit different. 4-year secondary, and so on. So they're all using different factors and different ADM weights. Some aren't weighting ADM at all. Some are weighting ADM. And they're all kind of doing it differently. In fact, if you go into the actual spreadsheet, which hasn't been modified for a few years, and unhide these cells, you can actually see the various scenarios that were considered by the group. And as we went through, we tried to figure out what that factor is supposed to represent and why they would have different weightings. You're 100% right that basically a data set was put in here, was put into a regression analysis. Your growth factor and the change in the line is what affects the slope of that bell curve, right? So a group got together, probably similar to us a while ago, and came up with what we think is exactly what you indicated, a way to distribute funds. But we couldn't figure out, or there's no trail, at least for those of us who came after this group, to figure out how they made these decisions. And why would you weight the ADM 00431 in one scenario and 0.379 in another scenario? If you undo what I did and just go back and modify the percentages, which is what we had determined has been happening for a while, is that we went in, I can up this percentage to 115, and it will absolutely do exactly what we indicated. It will change the WPU. It will distribute more funds to LEAs, right? But I'm not sure what basis I'm adjusting that on. If the point of the NESS formula is to recapture or supplement funds that are available to LEAs for small schools, it logically seems like we should be adjusting that based on cost of living or increased teacher salaries or increased costs in general. And it doesn't look like that's, at least from the evidence we've been able to find, is I can't find a table where I go in and evaluate your cost per student or your cost per school and raise that. And you're right, it's because this is not the appropriation calculation tool. This was a distribution methodology, right? And I think that that's where some of the conversation is sort of getting tangled up in each other, is that we're having conversations about asking for increased funding and then trying to plug it into a distribution methodology that doesn't change or modify with those two. It's not a good teeter-totter, right? And that's why we started asking questions about these.
I think in some of our discussions yesterday, Bruce, they're out, taking the WPUs going up every year. Maybe that kind of percentage should feed into this formula as well. So, there's more money falling in, let's just push it through and distribute it.
It already gets an increase with the WPU value.
Mm-hmm. Dollars do, but then the formula just needs authorization to push it out based on that same percentage increase. I think that's what you're saying, is you don't have authority to increase the formula or don't feel comfortable with that at this point.
Well, I think if someone asked me why I did it, the only answer I would have would be to get rid of money. It's not based on a data set. And if that's what I'm supposed to do, then I think we should write it in a rule and move on. But none of our other formulas function that way.
You need a motion on that?
For the rule change?
Yeah. So I have a question, and just because I'm too rusty on this. When we do enrollment projections, how are additional enrollments captured for this line item?
They're generally not.
They're generally not.
We just do the growth percentage, don't we?
So just a statewide average growth percentage?
So there
have been years where we haven't adjusted NESS for growth. And it's usually only when a school falls off that the WPUs get adjusted for.
So NESS generally changes for value change,
and not on
growth change.
We don't recalculate the WPUs like we do with all the basic programs.
So does the value change? Value of the WPU changes, so therefore you get additional dollars into here.
But the number of WPUs, doesn't change once the school falls off.
Does not change. So if that's the case, why is the carryover amount growing each year?
Because they've appropriated more money.
They've appropriated more money because of the value of the WPU in it.
No, they've done those increases.
The growth in the...
No, like the one-offs, like there was $500,000 put in, or there was 2.5 put in,
which would generate additional WPUs.
So then it's been distributed through the...
Because those are converted into WPU, right?
Yes, for the formula, yes.
And so as a result, you have WPUs.
The W's changed, yeah, the WPUs can't be distributed.
Can't be distributed because the formula continues to generate exactly the same number of WPUs in the past unless there's major changes in enrollment growth, which doesn't generally happen in schools that are receiving this funding. So it stays fairly constant.
Yeah.
So is that a source of disconnect, that if there's a lump sum of money made available?
I think that's the primary source of this disconnect.
Okay. So,
And because we
the
don't have a
answer
mechanism.
The answer would have been, how many WPUs does that dollar represent? And you would have changed your percentage to capture whatever the additional dollar was. Here's $500,000. Oh, the only way for this formula to work is change the WPU in that.
Right now, the only way to make this formula work is to change that percentage, that it's
But that's
increasing the factor.
Which gets you more WPU.
Yeah.
It distributes more of the, I would say that it distributes more to each school. So we do have schools that fall off.
Sure.
Right, and so, or schools that grow a little bit, right? And so the factor, exactly like you indicated, it's a declining factor, so the bigger you get, the less WPUs you get out of the formula.
Yeah.
So they kind of inverse,
Yeah.
but then that saved money doesn't get reallocated to someone else. Their factor is already determined in the table.
So, and I agree with that. What the challenge is you have a piece of money that doesn't tie to any factor in the regression. So if you were to find a factor to tie it to, it would be how do you relate your ADM story to WPUs? Not justifying, this is just, hey, someone said, here's $500,000, we love you. Don't tell me.
That's a 1% increase, so of this by 1%, right? Is that what you're trying to say?
Yeah, it's not based in any reality other than here's some additional dollars appropriated to you. We now need to tweak the formula, for lack of a more scientific term,
right,
to absorb or to capture that money into some distribution pattern. Now, whether it's the same pattern or we want to say, oh, the curve should shift or what have you, that's fine. That's a different conversation. But if we have money coming in and we have no way of actually getting it out the door through the formula, we got to adjust to something. And it sounds like the value of the WPU isn't the right choice, because now you have this multiple value conversation. Don't want to go there. I've already experienced that. Did it, unplugged it.
Yeah.
So the only other thing is what's the relationship in the ADMs and how many WPUs do they drive? Or it's that part of the formula that we're left with. And if it's this piece of the formula, what is that growth factor in order to suck up the money? Cool. That's the story. It's because there's more money. It's not a secondary discussion of did school costs rise or low, or did the profile of the students change one way or another. Those would have been arguments that would have been presented to the legislature, made more money available. That's that one-time scenario. I think we also have this ongoing thing, is how do we help this on a regular basis so we don't have this conversation with the legislator saying, hey, we're behind, there's not enough funding. Well, let's get this on a path that moves with everything else that moves on the line items of the MSP.
Dee, can I ask a question about your goal seek methodology? So did you go through and determine if the increased funding was the same for elementary, middle school, high school? I mean, I know it adjusted all the factors because you linked them all together, but did those with elementary schools get more of the increased funding than high schools, or? I haven't had a chance to run that here to see what it does, but.
So it's the same percentage across all the formulas, so.
But each of them uses
the base, the same percentage.
Because they all use different weighting factors.
Exactly, yeah. So the assumption would be they can't be the same, because the bases are all different if you give them all the same percentage growth.
Do have another chart here.
I think that's one of the other things that I was concerned about just, if I just manipulate, what if I only changed elementary school and we only gave increased money? I have a feeling that wouldn't be equitable or fair across our districts. Some have more NESS elementaries than others, some have none, some have no high schools. So trying to figure out how we allocate those additional funds to the different grade bands feels like something that we need to discuss and focus on as we're trying to decide these things, so that we don't disproportionately advantage one type of school over another. Or if we do, there's a reason, right? It's justified.
Or you keep all the proportional ratios the same, so that if you're getting 20% of the money before, you get 20% of the money after. It doesn't change your relative position.
Well, and something that Chad indicated is, and he's 100% right, all of the new funds that have come in, because we haven't been adjusting the percentages, are getting distributed in the next year based on the tax effort formula. So they go out, but they go out on a different basis than what your NESS WPs would have been. So that also creates a little differentiation in not being distributed.
So this chart kind of compares the different formulas to each other. It's not the formulas themselves. The green line is the 2-year and 4-year added together. Red is 2 3-years put together, and then the blue is a single 6-year. So you can see the scenario where you have a middle school and a high school, you have 2 3-year schools. Compare that to a 2-year and a 4-year, they're on the same curve. So those two formulas are pretty well in sync, other than the top end, the 3 years.
2 3-year schools? 2 3 years, they cap out at 450, so 2 of them hits 900.
Where do you think a K-12 school would fit on in this model?
I think elementary, you have 2 very different scenarios. Elementary, 1 teacher can handle 1 or 2 grades and the entire curriculum for those students. You hit high school, now you need 5 6 teachers minimum to handle the curriculum for 1 student. So
you have to have the licensed teachers in a subject matter for high schools, right?
Yeah.
So one of the things.
So very different cost scenarios between those 2 grade levels.
One of the things that we brought up last time, I don't know if you were able to hear on the video, right now what we're doing is artificially splitting schools to fit them into one of these regressions. So schools that really are K-12, we're breaking them in 2 pieces and plugging half in one regression and half in the other. And we weren't sure if that's allowable, if that's okay, if that was contemplated when these were set up.
As I've studied that this past year, I haven't come up with any better scenarios myself. I think having a K6 formula, if I ever had that chart out on here, it would be a very small curve down here at the bottom. The elementary formula is a lot smaller than what the high schools are. So I think it's embrace that difference of elementary being able to provide with a lot fewer teachers versus high school needing more.
Are there some economies of scale on a K-12 school? I think largely our K-12 schools are the really small, very kind of isolated area schools. We don't see a lot of those.
I've got one. I'm Bullfrog. And gosh, we're over 20 students now, but we went for a number of years where we were less than 10 even for a while. And I mean, we were losing so much money on that school, and I was doing computations and plugging property tax dollars, all kinds of state, federal, everything, and we were losing under several $100,000 a year. And so we worked with the Park Service, and we've got them helping us with custodial, because NPS is out there a lot. They help us with custodial, and we have 5 houses, and we've had to cut staff, so they're renting 3 of the houses right now, the NPS, and so I don't know about, and when we're broadcasting classes out from Kanab Valley to the high school to try to give those kids the best education that we can. Now that the enrollment's going back up above 20, I mean, the funding's, if it'll stay there, the funding's going to improve. But as far as economies of scale, what are you thinking on that? I mean, it's been hard to keep that school open.
I think the question I'm trying to ask is, I mean, you have costs whether you have 10 kids or 20, right? You have some fixed costs that right. Don't vary whether you have 20, 25, 10, and you have those that change based on your student enrollment and the needs of the students, right? But you have other NESS schools as well.
Yeah, we do.
And
that's the three.
Those NESS schools are in a different situation than Bullfrog, right? I mean, they still have some of the same challenges, but they're not.
Not that, no, not that, yeah, not as many challenges.
I think there's two very competing issues there. One is, sure, you got an economy of scale because you got one teacher serving 10 students. That you could call that an economy of scale, but on the other flip side, you got one teacher serving 10 grades or 6 grades, or I mean, just the value of what they're providing is so watered down. So where do you need to fall on that? You know, and then in the one scenario, yeah, this curve is perfect because it provides one teacher for those 10 students. The other scenario, on the left side, those curves ought to start clear up at the top and just decline all the way down so that you provide 10 teachers for that school.
Well, and that was going to be my question is I think we hear a lot of discussion about economies of scale, but those might not be the best solutions for students, right? And that's what we've been talking about is maybe one teacher for 10 grades isn't appropriate, and maybe that's not what we should be shooting for. I'm just trying to figure out if that's what we are shooting for. Like, what is the goal? Is the goal to make your NESS schools comparable to your non-NESS schools within your district? Is the goal to make Kanab and Sevier similar? That's what we were trying to analyze as we were looking through data is what is our target? What are we getting at?
I think the goal is to overcome that economies of scale problem. Like you're talking about the economy of scale, and I think the economy of scale comes in when you have a bigger school that generates enough WPU value to offset that big fixed cost. So just like Harry's got a K-12, I've got a K-6. The fixed cost for that school, the 30 WPUs that I get coming into it will never offset the fixed cost. So NESS is helping to overcome that. So yeah, when you say I've always looked at NESS as equalization within my own district. I'm able to take a North Sevier High and a South Sevier High and put them on the same playing field as Richfield High because of NESS. If I didn't have those NESS funds, those kids in Salina and Monroe wouldn't have the same opportunities as the kids in Richfield. So I look at it as it's equalization. It's putting students on the same playing field as everybody else.
Well, because that's the intent of the bell part of the graph, right? I mean, the way I understand regressions, it's been a long time since I really got into them. But the intent is you come to a certain point where we've all talked about it, that at some point you need more money to sustain your school. It comes up to a certain point and then it starts falling off because you have economies of scale, right? So when we decided this, to get to the top of that graph, there's some number that got you to the tipping point, right? Or whether that's number of kids or dollar amounts, I don't know. But is that the same number today as it was back then? I would think no, because of increased costs, right?
Well, your WPU value goes up every year, so the number of WPUs stays the same in the formula unless you change the percentage to it. But the WPU value changes every year so that you're adjusting for inflation. And you may, as you look at the left, you may say, well, you're gaining in the middle. That's not really true. If you look at this WPU value, starts right here at 4. And as you go up, see, we're only at 10 kids here. Now we get to 15, we're down to 3.5 WPUs per student. It's actually declining all the way, every step, from the very first kid to the last. It's not gaining in the middle, and it just use this function to make it okay.
The question that I have is 10 the right place to start, though, with a WPU? Does it need to be higher?
Can I just talk about your first question, and that was you're talking about costs and cost of change. To me, the question is not the cost, is the shape of the curve correct? Because we can shift it up with cost. We've established that. The real question is the shape of the curve correct? And then is it in the right level? Because if your shape of the curve is okay, then you can just do kind of what we did earlier, and it just shifts it up, and it accomplishes the goal. So that's, to me, that's the question, what it comes down to. Are we hitting the right point and starting down with economies of scale? And then the other thing that I'm looking at is when you go back to the additional funding that's come in, the 500,000 or so forth, that's really a question of, is the curve high enough? Because again, we're going back, this is a distribution formula. It's not necessarily, and in my mind, the only thing we really need to do is say, is the curve high enough at this point? Because if we, we could go through and create a new curve. There's no doubt about that, or start over. But in my mind, the question is the curve high enough? And the educational community has been saying for years, the curve isn't high enough. It needs to be pushed up. That's why we've been asking for 500,000. And so that's why in last meeting, I suggested that we look at a few schools and see what they are expending, and is the curve paying enough of that piece? Mm-hmm. And that really comes back to the question for the legislature is, do we need more money funded into it to get the curve up higher, and therefore fund more to NESS schools? So that's my thought on it.
How would we prove that the curve is the right shape?
I don't know if you can.
So then how do you make the argument
You just have
that you need more money? That's where I would come back, is that if you can't prove anyway that your cost of increase, how do we know what you're saying is right? Does that make sense? How do I go to a legislator and say, well, costs are increasing, and so we need to put more money?
Well, cost of increase. Look at payroll over the last 10 years.
But how do you prove that?
Look at what I'm paying people over the last 10 years.
Well, that's kind of the question I'm getting.
Almost 90% of our costs are payroll. So when payroll goes up every year, the costs go up.
But in theory, that's what the WP value is taken care of.
So I think the one argument is,
but we don't generate enough WPU value in these small schools to offset those costs.
But you get it in their base WP, you get it on their NESS WP, you get it on their professional staff, you get it in all these different formulas, and you come and say, well, the regression or the amount of money we're getting under the current NESS formula isn't enough. How do I prove that?
So what part of that NESS formula adjusts your salaries? What part of the NESS formula adjusts for those expenditures? Do we know? That's the part that we don't know. So that's what Natalie's asking.
I understand where you're coming from, and here's where I'm thinking is, in a similar manner to our transportation, one of the issues is we had a goal. The problem here is we don't have a goal. We don't know where we want to be. We don't want to be at 85%. What should NESS be funding? And so the where you went there is you said, what are we actually spending total and trying to get up to that? And so that's why I suggested the last time around, let's look at a few schools and see what it is funding. And that would tell us if we're way below, then yes, we do need to add some more money to bring it up, even if costs haven't gone up. But to some degree, what is the goal is a big question. And I would, if I was in your position, that's where I'd be asking. Where do we end? Is it just more and more and more and more? So I don't know. Yeah. But I'm coming to the conclusion we could recreate the wheel and we could try and do a new regression analysis, which would be kind of a best fit curve through some data, and come up with a new curve and what it looks like, and then it would match. But what does that do? That redistributes money. It causes a lot of problems as well, which I know is an issue as well within the schools. So is our distribution formula perfect? I don't think so, but I don't know if there's anything that we come up with that's significantly better. So to me, I'm just looking at it and saying, do we continue to use this same methodology that we've used before, shift the curves up to distribute the money, and then the discussion then goes to the legislature of, is that enough? And maybe we can't just completely justify it, but at least we've met one of the goals, and that's to distribute all of the money and not have the carryover, which becomes problematic. And then the discussion from there is, and it may become a political issue at that point.
Well, and that's really kind of where it's been. I mean, because at this point, it doesn't seem like anyone can prove whether or not more money is needed in the formula.
Well, you can ask the same question about the WPU.
Yeah. I mean, and really under the WPU, it's never intended to be. This is what the state is providing for basic education. Locals go do it.
That's your answer.
But at the same point, you come in and the argument always is, we're not getting enough money for NESS. And so how do you then go prove that? You can't. And
What we've done is taken Paiute High School, compare that to any of the larger schools around the state.
but is that really appropriate?
60 offerings in courses versus 200 so 60 offerings for 7 through 12 versus 200 for 10 through 12. You know, just once you throw that to the legislature, they said, yeah, here's another 500,000. Do what you can.
The big thing with that school fees audit was equal opportunity, regardless of income. Well, NESS is equal opportunity regardless of where you live. So it's totally appropriate to say, here's Paiute High School that can't even offer band right now, and I don't know, Richfield High School that has band and orchestra and traveling choir. The kids only 35, 40 miles away don't have the same opportunity. So yeah, I think that is an appropriate argument to compare a small school versus a bigger school.
So other states have gone to the rural school models of what they call precision funding. So what is it that's preventing the school from having band, right? Well, it's they can't hire this is just an example. They can't hire somebody to come and teach them. Well, what would that take? And so then they push it up through their boards, and then they say, this particular school, because of its location and all that, needs this exact amount of money, because we're getting into the school level reporting to give that equal access to, using your example for band. Yeah. And I think that from what I've heard from legislators, that's what they want to know. They want to know precisely what the costs are to ensure, without the message being that, we need more money, right? We need more money because in this particular situation, at this particular school, we're not able to provide band, or we're not able to provide art or history because we can't retain or do all that too. That's the ones that, from the legislators I've met with, Ben, is they're saying, okay, we get it, but then is it solving the problem, right? Because you're saying the problem is we can't, provide band or too. That's what they want to know. They want to know. I think they're all open to providing more money, and they're not. No one has told me that they want to take money away. They're just saying, how can we get to a formula that's more precise in solving your problems? We want to help. We want to get in there and say, for that school, because they're also getting to the point where they're saying, this might have been great back when there were 41 school districts, right? But now we're bigger. We're bigger and we're faster, and, all sorts of different demographics have changed and all that too. So what they're trying to do is get us, what's that?
You just mentioned charters, and I said charters come into this discussion.
They do, and that's the thing, whether we like that or not, that at our level, at the state level, we have to account for that. And so that's what's happening. And so they're asking us to just, these ideas are fine. What Bruce is saying is fine, and, what he's saying, but at some point we've got to get to the point where we're saying that whatever we ask for will solve the problem, like the example, which is a great example. That's good. That's awesome. How do we get to the point where we don't continue to be in what we call the doom loop of, we want more money, well, you're not telling us what the money's doing, and, how do we break this? That's what we're looking for. We're trying to break out of this.
I agree with you, Scott, because that's where I was at last time.
And that's good. Yeah,
I basically said we need to do a needs analysis to find it out. The problem is the answer is going to be way higher than we could ever afford, because what we saw was, if you looked at that curve, when he put $500,000 in it, that curve shifted just a teeny amount. So what that's going to mean is, in a school of 100 kids, you're probably going to get another $7,000 to $10,000. Now, what can you do with it? Can you go hire a teacher? No. You can't afford to do it. So that's the question is, and that's the same thing, the question we always have with the WPU. If we want to be, if the goal is to be equal to another school or state, the legislature throws their hands in there, and I don't blame them, because they just can't afford to do it. And I would love to do the analysis, Scott, you're talking about, to say, what would it take to put a teacher in each of these schools? Well, the number's going to be so high, we're not going to be able to afford it. And so that's why USBA has said, okay, realistically, when it comes down to it, we can ask for $500,000 and they might grant it, and at least it'll help a little bit, and we can take $7,000 from this school and $7,000 from this school, and maybe hire a quarter of a teacher or do something different. But I'm afraid, what we're going to find is the answer. If we set a goal where it really needs to go to get the equity that was talked about before, we're going to scare everybody to death, because it's going to be a very big number. And so that's why I'm just saying, that's why I said what I said earlier, is I could see that that'd be a challenge. And so I said, let's just try and use what we've got now to use up the money, come up with a formula that may increase it incrementally over time, knowing that the goal is way high. At least we can make some progress. And if the formula could do it on its own, so it came into the growth formula instead of having to ask for it as a separate item every year, and I think you made a comment that was really good last meeting, and that was, hey, let's, every time we bring it up, we get a target on the back of the NESS formula, which can be a real challenge. So if there's a way to just incrementally, much like we're doing with transportation, saying over time we're going to keep going toward a goal. We don't know what the goal is here. That's a problem. But if we can incrementally get it up, because we realize that it really does need to go higher, maybe that's a good alternative. So I backed off of where I was last time and started thinking, well, it is a distribution formula. It's not designed to exactly mirror what the costs of those schools are, because if you went back to that graph that Dee was looking at, they're all over the board. And if you tried to draw a best fit line through a curve through there, it's going to really skew things. So I don't know.
Just observing from the outside for a minute, there seems to be, we're stuck in a conversation that has only one tool to answer the problem. We're talking about being a rural school, and there are financial challenges with being a rural school. We haven't defined them all, so we haven't been able to articulate what they are. We have some ideas of what they might be. But when we look for money, we only look to one place. It's this NESS formula. That's the only thing that says, oh, you're rural, we need to do something to help you out. And it may be that our ask for additional dollars, because we're rural schools that have some cost differentials, that we're jamming it into this one formula, and it's just not responsive to the need. It's not that the formula is wrong, it's just the need we're describing doesn't fit the model. It works well for what it was designed to do, but it's not the answer to all rural school funding challenges. We have different pieces, we got the transportation piece to address that unique challenge of being rural. So there's some, just listening is, I think we're trying to make a formula do something that it probably was never fully capable of doing. On top of that, we have some other definitional challenges. One is we're dancing around the statutory requirement of having equal access. Well, that's not been defined, it hasn't been tested in the courts. We don't know what that means. So if I'm up in Park City and I'm providing 7 AP classes, is that disequitable to South Summit right next door? We're going to provide 3. Is that really a disequity, or is it something else? And it's also equal access to a basic education. Well, what's, again, undefined, but we will use those terms to say, hey, I don't have what my neighbor has, and that's disequalizing or disequitable, or stick your dis word in there. Have we been asked in this setting, this work group, to solve those challenges? Are we trying to figure that out? Or do we need to back up a little bit and say, hey, we have a formula problem. It has a curious distribution mode. Not all the money gets out day one. And day 2, when we come back and say what was undistributed, we get it out the door eventually. It finally gets out. We have an anomaly where well, it's not even an anomaly. We have this curious conversation that says, oh, there's minimum school programs with carryover balances. All the other programs, we don't seem to snuff at those. There is long history of programs either being under or overfunded based on estimates. When I was at the USOE, it was the guarantee programs were the hot topic because they weren't getting all of their monies out. And why do we keep building that into enrollment growth numbers? You know, it migrates and shifts. This is one that could be of that same flavor. It's, hey, we had an estimate, didn't hit the estimate, okay, there's an undistributed balance. It's an innocent answer. It's not a broken formula. It's not maliciousness. It's just, that's the way the formula worked that year. And we have a backup strategy to get the money out the door and we're all done. So in one sense, the formula isn't broke. It's just an estimation challenge and the dollars get out the door. Independent of that is a conversation, hey, I'm a rural school. I have some cost differential conversations to have with the legislature. Let's get specific, figure those out, and maybe it doesn't go into NESS. Maybe it goes, I don't know where it goes, maybe it's below the line and we get out of this trying to get it automatically funded. I'm just throwing some thoughts out, just watching the conversation. We might have backed ourselves into a corner.
But I think that's where I would like to see us spend our efforts is I haven't heard any of the BAs, even though it's not perfect. The distribution formula is okay. At least nobody's, as I've listened to BAs come up with something that they want to go to. If this is broken, let's fix it. So if it's not broken from the BA's position, the district's position, that's one thing. But Ben and Scott have got to be able to answer legislators, and that really, I don't think that has a lot to do with this distribution formula. What they're trying to say is, why do they need more money? And it's being driven by charter discussions that 20 years ago weren't on the table, at least at any significant level. So now we've got to do that, and I think we would work from now till hell freezes over and not be able to come up with a perfect, this is what a small school needs. Because even if you could do it and offer orchestra and travel choir and everything else, even if you could hire the teacher to do that, you don't have the kids to put in it. And so, you know, that becomes a moot point too, is we want to provide the best possible education we can and have enough kids to put in that. Because you can provide stuff, you know, if the money were not an issue, you could provide stuff that you don't even have kids to put in it. That, you know, bullfrog. So you got a lot of money and you could bring in programs, you still don't have the kids. So I think we're on a slippery slope when we get on that, because then we've got to try and say, okay, what exactly is a basic education? Well, I don't know that any of us want to back up to exactly basic, bare minimum. We couldn't even define that. But do our kids deserve music? Yeah. At what level? Well, we probably can't offer all three at Rich High School because we don't have enough kids to go if we did. You know, so I just, when we start talking about that, I just think, you know, from my perspective, is that where all my schools are rural schools, you would have a hard time. Now, we've tried to address it with distance learning. You know, we don't have any AP because we don't have it, but we've tried to do that with concurrent enrollment. So I think some of those things that we're trying to do and get funding there, but and I don't want to sound like I'm afraid to go down that road, but when we start trying to, you know, Rich High School with 135 kids and what we can offer versus Bullfrog, you're never going to make those completely equitable, because if you had the money, you still have the kids. And that's a hard thing, I think, for Wasatch Front legislators to totally understand. And yet, we don't want to bare bones up to the point we can't offer them anything. And that becomes, and Scott, I don't know how you would ever get to any kind of reasonable magic number on that, because it does have a lot to do with this regression formula. At 10, you certainly need a lot more money than when it peaks up there. When you get to 600, again, where'd that come out from? I don't know, but nobody seems to have a big hang up with that, at least the ones that are getting the NESS funding. So I think in a way we're trying to fix something that necessarily isn't broken, except getting the money out, which can be handled with this other. And, you know, I'll get shot for saying it, you know, because we all need more money, but just like I said last time, I think we've asked for some things that we haven't thought a lot about except asking for more. And if we can tie it to the WPU, and it increases as the WPU increases, which gives you something to go back to the legislature with, is okay, whether NESS funding is perfect or not, at least it's tied to something. It will increase as the WPU increases. So that's built in. The regression formula seems to be working. We'll raise that as we need to as the WPU raises, so that we're getting the money all distributed. And Ben's going to still get beat up because the charters are going to say, well, we're not getting that.
Yeah.
But at least it gives him something to say to them, and it might get us off the hook. If we get too cute here, folks, we're going to lose.
Here's a suggestion that I kind of made to Ben in a very short time when he was out at Garfield a couple of days ago. And that was that we, as was talked about before, we move the curves up to spend the money. And we keep doing that every year. So it spends the money. We just adjust the curves up to just to whatever the amount of money is, and that way it's spent, it's sent out. Now, in a similar manner to this, we have another equity, a couple of other equity formulas that don't really have a goal at the top. And one of them is the voted. The two I'm talking about is the voted and local. The local and the voted. I'm going back to my old terminology, and it's not making sense to me. But the voted and the board local levies have a guarantee, and those go up by the percentage of the WPU from the prior year. They have. That has been the.
We need to fix that, but yeah.
But that has been the concept throughout the years, has been that they go up by the increase in the value of the WPU the prior year plus a factor. Now where I'm going is that this formula already brings in money based on the WPU going up. But the other factor is if we can come to the conclusion of saying that we're not getting enough money into this formula to really meet the goal, the voted board local guarantee programs are just saying every year it's going to be a little extra to get closer to equity. We don't even know what that equity is, but it's getting us a little closer every year. And so that would be a possibility here of coming in and saying the WP is already taken care of, so you don't have to, because the value of the WP is going up. But if you were able to put a small escalation factor in there, similar to voted board leeway, so that it increases it just a little bit every year, at least it'd be automatically getting us a little closer to what probably is equitable. It's probably never going to get us there, but put something in there. And then it eliminates some of the concern of having to go to the legislature every year and put a target on this program. So it's an option that we ought to look at as well as some sort of escalation factor is what I'm really getting to, that it be similar. We have other equity programs that have those built in that we've had in place for a long time, and so that's why I went to that thinking, hey, it's nothing different than we've done with other programs.
If I could offer just maybe one quick clarification. You mentioned, maybe we haven't thought a lot about what we would do with this money, or what are we really asking for? Well, for my district, I absolutely can tell you, we spend time every year. We look at all our schools. I can tell you where I need AP courses, where I need an elementary teacher. But I think that discussion is best left to your local school board administration. We could debate that here and never come up with an answer, but that little money pulls into a district. They can say, okay, we got this NESS money. Man, we're doing these courses over here in this school this year. Next year, that school, yeah, we can get another half a teacher there. But that, school board. So there's the answer to Unless you want to throw out the whole thing and create this pinpoint financing.
No,
and
I
leave it
didn't
to the
say throw
local.
out the whole thing. I
Yeah,
just
but
said, this is part of the discussion, so yeah.
I think that whole thing, we can beat ourselves up, but
Well,
it should be up to the local school boards.
And I know this is extremely political, and Steve mentioned it to me earlier, and so I don't want this to become a big deal, but
It's just on the.
it's just on the west day, yeah. Is by definition, this is necessary in existing small schools. Charter schools, and I'm not saying anything negative about them, they're choice schools. They're not necessary in existing small schools. So while that's a hard sell, it's still by definition different. And I think that's significant because, again, not in any way knocking those, but the charter schools have the option of being assimilated into the big Wasatch Front schools. Would make I'm so dry I can't talk. Would make very little, difference in terms of enrollment spread out across them all. So I'm not talking down charters, but by definition, they don't qualify.
And really, when that comes up in a discussion, it's only in relationship to cost, because you would have some very small charter schools, and so what a legislator will look at is, well, what's the difference of providing, so this charter school gets this amount of money without NESS, and then we have this school that's the same size, but is a NESS school. So that's the only place that comes up. And I think there are reasons for that, but those reasons have never been really flushed out.
Or they're not a valid question.
Yeah.
Just because size is compared, that's not the only variable.
Correct.
For analysis.
Right.
Yeah, they're not doing transportation, they're a lot of other things.
Right. It's just a one-point comparison. It's like, hey, I have a long-sleeve shirt. I should get the same pay as everybody else in this room because we all have long-sleeve shirts.
I think Todd and Superintendent boiled it down pretty well. I think we keep going around in this circle because we're having two separate discussions. Really, I mean, there's the discussion about the formula, which, like you said, none of us really feel like it's broken, except for the fact that it's not distributing all the money. And that's like why earlier when you said what you said, and I said, can we just have a motion on that? Because you said, let's just distribute all the money and call it good. I'd be great with that. But then I think there's the whole other argument that keeps working its way in about justifying the cost and justifying the money. And that's where I think you might have to go down the road of discussing equity issues and defining that. But if the ultimate goal is let's distribute the money, and then I don't know that we have that big of a problem. Let's work on that, distribute the money, and all good.
Yeah, I would have to, as far as the business managers that I'm aware of, like Superintendent Lamborn was saying, I'm really not aware of anybody that's really unhappy with the way it is, the way the formula is working. And if we could just, figure out a way to get it to all distribute out, which we've talked about.
Well, yes, although we do hear, though, that we're not distributing it. That we hear, well, there's not a problem. Then we hear, well, you're holding money back, or you're not.
Right.
How do we know you're distributing it all? And we're very transparent about the balances, and why they result that way. We're not, they result that way because of the calculations. There's a formula in there that formulates the balances. I mean, I even get that, right? I see that. So you're right. I mean, although we still do hear this over-sensing thing that the USBE is holding back money, we're not getting it, so it's not...
Right, but if we just figure out how to distribute that out, then...
So if that's really what we want to do is just, make sure we just don't have any carry-forward balances.
I think Natalie brought up a good point.
However, go ahead.
Well, can I interject one other issue that we're concerned about?
Yeah.
So we have external auditors who come in and look at formulas. We have to sit down with them and show them, here's the data points we use, this is why we changed this number, here's the things that go into this. I don't know what an auditor would think. So stuff that I've been writing down, if we determine that the appropriate way to solve this conversation is that we adjust the percentage, then somewhere in statute or rule, there needs to be a description of how we are going to adjust that percentage. And if that gets passed and I hand that to an auditor, that's what I'm going to tell them. Because we can't explain how we came up with the data that we're using, the curve, I can't explain why it makes any sense, and maybe they won't care, but maybe they will. And in the past, when all the formulas that they've looked through, they've been very, very directed in ensuring that our data points match the statute exactly, that we're doing what the statute and rules tell us to do. So if that's the outcome of this committee, then we would ask that you put an exact directions for what we have to do to move this curve every year so that we're at least covered.
After we get it, if we got the curve up to the point where it was distributing all the money, the following year, would it not be that we needed to increase that factor by the value of the WPU unless some additional money was added? Because the money would just go up by that percentage, so you potentially would be just, maybe we need to validate that.
You'd have to factor in if school size has changed anywhere too.
That's true. Yeah, you would have some other things with school size, and it may be that from time to time you have to go back and bring the curve completely out, but you'd have some very small carryover with that. You're always going to have, as Todd brought up earlier, on just about every MSP program, you've got some differentiation, low or high, every year because they're all based on estimates. And so maybe you have to true it up every so often, but as a general rule, if you increase that factor by the value of the WPU, and then if we as a group or whatever agreed that we add an escalation factor, it would be similar to how the voted board leeway guarantee reads now, except that it'd be current year increasing the WPU plus 0.00 something, some small percentage as well. So I think it could be done, and I think it could be done fairly reasonably. You still would have some variance. There's no doubt about it that you'd either have to come back from time to time and true it up, or maybe that money is then recaptured by the state because it would be such a small amount anyway. So, just as a thought.
Can I ask a question from a distance?
Go ahead, sir.
My question is, it sounds like we just need to have the formula adjusted to distribute all the money, and that'll solve a lot of problems, because if it's in board rule, that'll solve the auditing problem, and that'll solve the legislature's where's this money going and how it's being spent questions. My question is, to justify the need, would it be helpful to collect data on half a dozen NESS schools and then plot them along the curve to show why we have the curve, and to show that the need is much higher than the curve is now, and then possibly come up with a plan to try to meet that need eventually? It sounds to me like we have two challenges. One is to make the formula work for funding purposes as well as meet needs purposes, but also we need to have a good talking point with the legislature. So it seems to me like rather than collecting data at every single net school, if we set up some criteria for collecting data and then collected data on half a dozen schools and plotted them on the curve, that would really help us to justify the need. Is that helpful?
So can we go into the next data set? Because that's exactly where we're headed. It was a really good introduction. Segue. Is everyone comfortable moving to the next data set, or do you want to stay here?
Let's move on.
Okay, I'm going to move on.
I was just we can move on to just clarifying questions. So you're worried about, are the rules sufficient to justify the data points in a regression formula? And I'm trying to read really quick to see where the actual statement is with regards to a regression formula. I think it just says...
It says they will be adjusted after a board approval. Doesn't it say that we adjust for regression
formulas used below and how the ADM
Where are you at, Jamie?
That's off the number.
Yeah, regression formula, that's B, 6B.
B6. It's 6A.
Oh, okay.
So, using a regression formula adopted by the board. So at this point, just asking the question, are you saying that you're absolutely no
So
rule adopted that has a regression formula in it? Or has the US doing that under the auspice of this rule, even though all the data points haven't been spelled out specifically and get there? Or do we have enough? Law says, board create a rule, okay, we got a rule, and the next level down is not as critical in documentation for an auditor. Hey, we got the law, we got the rule, we're good to go. Or do we have to have every data point now spelled out? You know, we have there's 8 different data points that can move on that regression. Does every one of those now have to be spelled? Are you trying to get to that point?
No, what I was trying to say is that this would be the only formula that we don't adjust based on data points. Every other formula that we have, we either update membership or head counts or ELL counts or costs in the miles and minutes. Like every other formula we have, even the voted on board, we update assessed valuations, WPUs. There's data points that you can calculate, and you're correct, not every single one of those and how they move is defined in rule. This would be the only one that doesn't have a data point that I change. So if we go in and move the percentage and we agree that that percentage moves to get rid of money, that's a little bit different than go update head counts, right? There's a data set, there's some rules behind how we can gather that. Like all the other ones are fairly logical, and up to this point, I used to do what the auditors do now, right? And I would have asked the exact same questions I'm asking today if I were still in their shoes. We don't have many questions about transportation. We've resolved our transportation data things. We think there's some clarifying issues that we're still working through, but not to the level that would rise to the statement that, well, nobody can really explain how this works, right? Like that's where this one is kind of unique in its own little box, is that it's not logical. There's not a history of how it's moved.
Okay, so I would argue that we don't know the history, whether it's illogical. I would argue the fact that we can't articulate it isn't necessarily a problem in and of itself, because it functions a certain way. Whether we want to backward engineer it and try and assign, those 8 values that move are because of the budget variables. Well, it was never designed that way from the get-go. But just caution, we're trying to get ourselves down too tight. Cold machine in this bed. Downstairs. Create a monster that we can't control.
The other things that aren't solved by just adjusting the formula and moving the curve is I still have K-12 schools that were artificially splitting. Yep. I have K-8 schools that were artificially splitting.
Yep.
And I'm supposed I have application and eligibility issues, which that's like issue number 3, right? Get you in the door. How do we say we need more money? How do we get rid of it?
So is there any level of materiality with that, or any level of insignificance? Because like I look at the K-12 problem and say, we've only got 3 or 4 of them in the whole state. Is it a big enough problem to even care about? In the K-8, maybe there's a couple of those. So I don't know, is it a big enough issue to really focus time on, or do you just say, yeah, I recognize that it's an issue, but we're just going to keep doing what we've done because it's insignificant to the whole pot of money?
Well, I think that we should, wherever it lists out what we use, is that in ruler statute?
Statute.
Yeah. So there are enrollment caps for elementary, 1 to 2 year secondary, 3-year, 4-year, and 6-year.
So it's a definitional problem.
It's statute.
Well,
so if we add
when you read that further, I was just talking to Superintendent Board, but I wasn't going to bring this up, but B says the regression formulas establish these factors. I think it's the other way around. These factors are establishing the way we are doing the regression formula, not the other way around.
Sure. I would agree.
So, in technicality, you're out of compliance with statute.
Yeah. I know. So I would argue that if you're okay with how I'm out of compliance, we write it in the statute so I'm not out of compliance.
say just what he said. The numbers established a regression formula. Now, why did we come up with the numbers? But then would be
That's
with
the
the
question that's
statute.
gonna come up.
How we came up with the numbers, right? Yeah.
So what if I have a school that wants to fit within one of these confines and asks me to split them differently than I'm splitting everyone else?
Because you have a few exceptions, make me an exception too.
Well, that's exactly what
I
happens.
can see where you're at.
And we go back to here and go, this is what the law says, oh, but I'm not really following it, so I guess I'll do whatever you want to. Like, I think that's the hard part, is like, I don't actually care what the answer is. I do care. I don't have an opinion on what the answer is. I just want this to be fixed so that I can point to the rules and say, this is how we handle your scenario. This is how we handle this situation. Oh, you're a K-12? Okay, well, I'm going to split you between here on this line.
Which, Carrie, that's what feeds the people, the input that we get back, that you're not giving us a formula, you're not, you know. Because when we try to explain it to them, you know, it doesn't go through that, which, you know, is fine. I'm not, you know, it's just, this is where we get stuck at this level, you know, with the perceptions, you know, or misperceptions maybe, you know, with this, because it just doesn't allow us to say precisely why we're either not doing it or why we're doing it. Why we're doing it to this level, not doing it to the elite.
Because Scott decided to do it that way.
Yeah, that's what they usually say, and then that causes all sorts of, you know. So.
And I think that until I came to the last meeting, Natalie, that wasn't even on the radar, and I don't think it's been on the radar much for any of the discussions we've had. But when you brought it up last meeting, it's a huge issue, because those things, unless we can say there are only a few, but I think there's more than we realize that aren't meeting the definitions. You know, and I don't know how big a hurry we're in, but I think that's a discussion the superintendents and DAs need to have at length. Okay, are we messing with the definition just to get the money, or are the definitions right? And it's I think it's a super important discussion, because you're out of compliance basically, or you're making decisions.
Right.
But I don't know that we've had a very good discussion on that where we can represent our various, at least I haven't had it with superintendents at a level that I feel very comfortable representing them on look where we're at. And I think we need maybe to look at the schools, and I don't know if you could provide that for me, but
Take another field trip?
yeah. What schools are in what definition, and which ones are you having to arbitrarily
to
do it
by
by
sent
school?
that all to you in the first.
So we have K-12s, and we have K-8s. What other?
We have some 1-6s, which we plugged into elementary, because
I would support,
That's a whole different.
we have some 6th grades that are in middle school.
And I think all we've looked at up to now.
But that's on here, 3 years, like 6, 7, 8.
contemplated under law.
And they're a maximum consolidation, so.
This just says elementary school.
I mean,
K-8 would be an
I just
elementary.
don't think we want to create 7 new curves. We're just trying to figure out if everyone's okay with us putting K-12 or splitting K-12.
I don't think you can make new curves without creating all the other curves.
Right. Right.
And so,
Right. So we're back
I
at the
don't know
beginning
what
of the.
standard you would do to make those new curves, because really you have to redistribute the WPUs among all the curves, because you're working in a zero-sum game here. And so to create these new categories, you would have to go through and redo them all. But then do you have statutory authorization to do that? I would say at this point you don't.
So we'd have to get approval or authorization or make a proposal if we needed to do that, right?
That'd be statutory change.
Is it?
Right, and then the question comes, well, then what are we basing this WPU amount for these schools? We get back to our root problem.
What is a school? If I've got 2 3-year secondary schools, but they're in the same building, have the same physical address, are they 2 separate schools, or are they one 6-year school?
Right now we're
The whole
treating them
school
as
and
2.
school thing.
Yeah.
Right now we're
Right
treating them
now,
as 2.
each local education agency says, I'm 2 3-year ones, and I get more money than you because I just said I did.
Well, and we're not enforcing the
equitable?
hold harmless provision in statute either. I mean, that's
Well, isn't
in
there,
full disclosure.
don't you guys use under board rule a definition of what a school is?
There's actually no definition of school in the rule. We've been working on that
I
one
was
too.
told I had to get rid of this thing. It's all dated back to the time that existed.
Program.
So I think that
So one,
there's gotta be something out there. Just
one
because they have the
potential
same
problem
street
with the formulas is that last chart I put up, your 1 and 2 plus a 4 and your 3 and 3, you put those are in sync. Wouldn't matter whether you do a 1 and 2 and a 4 or a couple of 3s, you're gonna get the same money. The problem comes in at the 6th year. It's quite a bit lower than those others. So that's, do we try to move that 6th year up so that everything's in sync now? It doesn't matter. And you also get rid of the incentive to try and build 2 schools versus 1. And they, if they define it one way or the other, they get the same money. It's if the formulas are the same.
Can I ask you a question about that? Because can I have a copy of the rule? So there's something in one of these, and I can't remember where it is right now, and there's criteria within eligibility, and we wanted to kind of get to this today too, where it talked about what you have to be a NESS school. And I don't know if you guys had the opportunity to read through the applications, but everybody has a good, different reason for being a NESS school. And kind of like you illustrated earlier, your needs are not going to be the same as Chad's needs. They're definitely not the same as Carrie's needs. Places that I feel we're out of compliance is in determining eligibility. And I think it's a pain for you guys to keep having to submit an application over and over, where we look at it and go, well, you don't really fit 1 or 2, but you did fit 3 and you're before 2010, so whatever, right? Like, yeah. I would love to get to a eligibility definition that ensures that we don't open the door for other things that don't belong, but is also easier than what we have now.
If you're my solution on that. So, in the statute, 2B says an application must be submitted to the board before April 2nd. Board must report on the decision before June 2nd. I think that could be interpreted only new schools. Okay, and then the reason I would justify that is
I move to approve that motion.
I think the criteria that exists in the board rule very much lends itself to new schools, especially based on the history of the state. You go back to the 1800s, in settlements all over the state, they built one-room schoolhouses. Just give me a couple minutes here, I'll tell you where I'm going with this. But you got these one-room schoolhouses. By the 1900s, early 1900s, you have 400 school districts. Early 1920s, 30s, they had this era of consolidation, huge push. All these small schoolhouses, I grew up driving by these falling down schoolhouses. Yeah, that's where my dad went to school, that one-room schoolhouse there. So they started consolidating, and it was a state effort. The state board was involved, committees. I wish I had lost this. I had a study from the state board committee in the 1930s, I think it was, where they came out, studied my district, Duchesne County School District, wrote up this 20-page report. They said my district had reached maximum consolidation. And you see that term pulled forward into these rules now. It came out of, that term came from several decades of huge work, pulling these schools together, consolidating, especially in rural areas, and studies by the state board saying, yeah, okay, you guys, you're not good enough in this area, you still got too many, let's work on that. At that point, we had 20 schools, and they said we're maximum consolidation. We're down to 13 now, so it didn't stop with what they had done then, but back in those days also, there was dirt roads. We didn't even have paved roads until the 60s. I mean, your transportation issues on how you can consolidate. In the beginning, my dad rode his horse to school till the 6th grade. So that one-room schoolhouse in his area met that need, but then they got buses. Now they consolidated into a different area and started bringing kids in from a 100-mile radius or diameter anyway. So you get to the issuance of the small school formula. I think it was early 70s when that first started, is the best guess I have. And the applications came in. There was no question about qualifications like we have today. It was, oh yeah, we've been through this. We know your district. Here's the report that says you're at maximum consolidation. You're in. There was no question. I don't think there was any question of who qualifies. It had been a statewide effort to get to that maximum consolidation, and now it's just, okay, let's push a little money out to the schools in these rural areas that need the extra money. There's a new road between Altamont and Roosevelt that's only 20 years old. And when you pull up Google Map to try and justify the existence of my small school, it now throws that Google Map on that road. It's across Indian land. We couldn't get permits. It barely got it 20 years ago. And the speed limit, up until the 1960s, you couldn't travel more than 20 miles an hour on. So now we up the speed limits to 60, 70, 80 miles an hour. But the formula for the qualifications were set when the speed limit was 55, and many dirt roads where you're only doing 20. So yeah, a lot more time back then. Now that those schools are established, early 40s and 50s, you start pumping state money and local money, passing bonds, huge sacrifice to build a school. Hundreds of millions of dollars now invested in those communities. And then you're saying, well, now you got a new road, you don't qualify for small schools money anymore. I think that's just, you're comparing two different eras of time. So I would say the statute, I think, allows to say only new schools need to apply. Maybe there needs to be some kind of a review to make sure huge situations haven't changed. But basically just say everybody's in is in, new schools apply if they're created, and that's what these new criteria apply to. The existing schools fall under the maximum consolidation that was done through those decades of work.
Well, I was sitting in the webinar for this last meeting, but I thought I heard it said that the only way you can move out of there now is if you grow to that point where you
grow or you consolidate. That's how you.
Yeah, I mean, just get on. For some reason, all of a sudden, some rural place just blew up growth-wise, and then they would grow out. But other than that, that's what I heard from this last month. So
that's what the precedent is.
Well,
did I ever teach you? I know I was a teacher in your school. Weren't you at Union High School when I was a teacher? Because you just did a good job, and I think I was part of the. Oh, you were at Altamont, and I was at Union High probably the same time. I'm sorry.
Well, that's what I threw out last time at the end was if you're already in, that should be you're in.
So I don't remember what happened with Tooele a year ago or 2 years ago, and I wish the superintendent was here so he could talk us through it. But they actually consolidated the school.
I can tell you because I was there when the school was anticipated.
So they were eligible prior.
They were eligible prior. There was an elementary and a high school on the base. And what happened was that the federal government came in and said that they wanted to replace the school because it was aging. And we talked them into building a larger school to replace the two existing older schools, and they funded it. And so the rationale behind it was getting new schools that were better meeting the needs of the students. The size of the student population out in the base on Dugway had been declining, and so it made sense to do that. There was discussion at the time of potentially eliminating a principal and a custodian because there was one at each school, so there would be some cost savings associated with it. But that was the rationale. It was actually before Superintendent Rogers' time. He was there when the school was completed, but the discussion was under Superintendent Linares.
So I know that so back to the comment that you made, schools fall off of NESS if you're not previously eligible, if you grow or if you consolidate. So we had questions from Tooele about what happens if we consolidate. I know we've had questions from Wayne about what happens if we consolidate. And in the past, we can't, there's a hold harmless provision for like 2 years for consolidation in here, right? All of the districts that before me, I don't know if Wayne ended up doing what they wanted to do or not. I think they're still thinking about it. Tooele, nothing changed with how we reported the Tooele schools. We made no adjustments or changes to their NESS, right? And in theory, we probably should have reevaluated their eligibility after they consolidated. So I don't disagree with you, Dee. Like, if you're eligible and you're determined eligible and the conditions or the criteria at the time that was required, I'm with you. I don't think I should have to reevaluate that every year. Nothing changes. When something changes, how do we evaluate that? Because that's not spelled out anywhere.
With Tooele, clearly they would have still met the mileage issue. I mean,
except for now they're a K-12 instead of 2.
And I agree with you. That's where I was going next. Now you have a K-12, but there's not a K-12 formula. So that's...
So in lieu of not harming anyone, and in lieu of not harming Tooele, we didn't do anything. Because we don't know what we're supposed to do.
Well, we've got another one with an application that says we're bigger than we're supposed to be, but if we don't have the NESS funding, we'll close the high school. And it's the economic engine for the whole city. If you close that high school, our whole city will die. And so they're bigger than the size. They're already, the only thing, there's no reason that they should be a NESS school other than they're saying, well, give us an exception because...
What do you mean they're bigger than the size though? They'd still be trickling down the ADM.
Are they split? Are they split in the counts?
No.
How much money would they
by the time you hit 600 WPUs, you shouldn't be getting any
Do
money.
we have anybody that's bigger than you?
That's gone out of it?
We have people that have gone out.
But still continues to get money?
No.
No.
Okay, so if they grow out of it, they do lose.
Or outside of the small.
I lose money every year.
I think it's possible that on some of those that we're splitting, they might be close on the margins of being too big, but they're not considered too big because they're split.
And if you're split, you can qualify up to 400, up to 900 kids. If you use a 6-year formula, it's only 600 kids. And therein lies Wayne's issue.
Do you want to move on to the school level work that Vaughn and Brett and John have been working on?
Yeah.
Do you want to continue this discussion about eligibility? Do we want to finish something? I'm trying to figure out, do you want to get through our data or do you want to finish a topic?
Just to say this, I've been to soup in 3 districts, and we had one in North Summit, we had one in Carbon, I've got some western schools in Box Elder, and my biggest fear is just now that we're ingrained like we are and we've paid for the buildings, I'm here to fight for make sure we keep status quo at the very least. You know, the ones that have been in, it just would cause us so much chaos in each one of those districts to not get that money now. I don't know how we'd ever get out of it. And so I think, maybe I'm just hearing what I want to hear, but I think that's what I'm hearing here. And so that's a key. That just because of the way things have been built, even a 2-year hold harmless, you know, at North Summit, I think that would really throw them into some financial chaos. Same at Carbon. And even though Box Elder's so much bigger, those 3 schools clear out the west, we'd probably have to find a way to bust them in if we change things. They're probably never going to change because there's so few of them out there. Yeah. They might have.
I'd like to see what.
That'd be okay. They've got something together.
Well, I think we found more issues than we were expecting.
You're supposed to have all the answers.
So I brought up Severe's information. Severe's done, right? Is that one that's finished? Hang on, I got to push. So we have two pieces of data that we're working on. We're not finished by any means. Remember, we're still working through APR and AFR.
Early preliminaries.
These are preliminaries. They're not final. We've got some school level calculations that Mon and Brett will go over. And then the other thing I wanted to show you is we have taken the data from 2011, which is what was provided to us in one of the previous NESS work groups. We've put those data points in here, and then we've put in the comparison of current year, the current year 2017 information. We're not, sorry, it's really small. I don't know why that screen over there died. So this isn't done. This is why we didn't send it out to you. We've been working on some of these things in the past day or so.
Can you walk through it so we know?
So Vaughn, can you go through how you guys calculated the school level and what your different, you guys can't see the colors, but some of these are blue and.
Do you want to make it bigger?
Yes.
We'll zoom in.
Yeah.
How much bigger?
Scroll up so that they can see them.
Hang on.
Or go freeze those.
My mouse is broken. Hang on.
Freeze those cells.
Yeah, freeze it right here.
Yeah.
Freeze it, you can let.
Okay, so
Yeah. Go to row 9 and freeze it.
yeah, just right there. Okay, so in the SLI, it says that the state has to do a report card on every school in the state. And there's a piece in there, section 10 of that piece, outlining all of the things that have to be in the state report card are listed in there. Item 10 is that they have to have a financial thing showing school level reporting. And so what we've done is we've broken it into, we've been working with a group that works with 37 states to make sure that we're all in compliance with the code. And this is the lowest level of reporting that we, or the highest viewpoint, lowest piece of data that we can get to. But what it says is that you have to use actual numbers for both salaries and benefits and everything. You have to use actual, you cannot use budgeted numbers for any of this. And so it requires that you show the amount of federal and state and local money at each school. And so what we've done is we've gone through and we've done how much is spent at the site level and how much is at a district location. And the piece on the district, you'll notice that it's the same all the way across there. All we've done is taken and said, okay, here's how much was spent at the district level, divide it by the number of students in that school, divided by the number of students in the entire district, and then allocate that across. So the per student, these are per student numbers, okay, right here. So we use the...
Can I pause you for 1 sec?
Yeah.
So on the site or central level, we had a significant number of work groups and discussions where we talked about what we were fine with not being allocated at school level. Like transportation, child nutrition, those kinds of things. It's not practical. No one has enough accountants in the whole wide world to account for all those things. So that's an okay thing, and we're using the same function object codes for everybody to create these lines, right?
Yes.
We're not doing a unique thing for every district. Everybody's the same.
Yeah, and if you want to scroll down, I just want to show a couple of things at the bottom down here. The enrollment here, I used for these, that's perfect right there. I used the October 1 enrollment. I've been told I need to go to ADM, so we'll be changing those to get in there. But down here we have the exclusions. Here's the dollar amount of the exclusions for this one. And then we explain here that the excluded expenditures include capital construction. We give the dollar amount and the debt service. Those are the two pieces that we're excluding: the capital outlay, the construction, and the debt service. And then we explain that the enrollment on this one comes from the October 1 count. We also have the total expenditures at each school. So if you'll want to scroll back up, we've gone through and pulled these, and how we got the federal here is we took the program numbers that start with the 7 and got all of those in there. Probably a truer thing would be if on the high schools, if we got the federal CTE. I'll need to go back and fix those. Right now it's just using the programs that start with a 7 at each school. And so you can see that this one is identified as being a Title I school, so is this one, this one, this one. And this one is not. You can see other schools that are not. So that would explain kind of why there's a big difference between those two schools on their federal share. We also take the federal revenue into your school lunch fund and divide that by the total school lunch revenue, and then use that to project how much of your school lunch is federal and how much is state and local. So this includes both the school lunch and all of the federal programs that are in there. We do the same thing down here. Any of the programs that are the pieces of the federal programs that are at the district office are not coded. I shouldn't say at the district office. Those are the ones that are not coded to a school location, okay? If they're not coded to a school location, they end up down here. So the state and local is everything else minus the exclusions. And we showed you these.
The state school lunch then?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So you've broken it
state
out into federal and then the state is in the school lunch is in the state. Okay.
Yes. Both the state and the piece that the parents pay. Any paid lunches.
Where's the piece that got coded to a non-location? How did you?
They end up down in this piece right down here.
Just divided out on pro rata?
Per student across the whole district. So that's why this is the same all the way across it. So on a district-wide basis, per student, that's what it is. But you can see down here, you've got a total expenditures per student, and down below there, a couple of lines is the total expenditures for that school. Okay?
Hey, Vaughn, can I make a comment?
Yeah, go ahead.
There were multiple cases where I had to go back and talk to some LEAs because they were using their own locations and not the Cactus location. And in that case, it comes across, in UPass, what it does is if it's not a correct Cactus location, it automatically puts it to the LEA ID and not that code that you should be using in Cactus.
Yeah.
And so it will get coded to the district level in that case.
So in the case of your one that doesn't match, you're going to have to go back and search and replace.
And so in those cases, it will show that you have really high amounts at the district level.
Who's they? I'll take you to talk to him after. Okay, I'll take you to talk to him. So that's how we did it. If you want to look at the accumulation piece over here, this is where we did it. We went with the school locations. We took the federal.
Sorry, Vaughn, hang on.
Yeah, that's fine.
Can you guys see that?
Yes. Yep. So we took the federal here. Here's where it breaks out the school lunch into the two pieces. What it does is here's where we took the federal revenue divided by the total revenue. So at this particular district, it's just over 62.33% is federal on their school lunch. So it takes the total amount of the school lunch and breaks it into those two numbers right there. This is where we got the exclusions. If they had capital construction at a particular school and they listed it, charged it to the school, it's there. Otherwise, it's at the district at the end. Here's the total expenditure, so it takes that and takes out the exclusions and comes down to the state and local total right there. So you can see all of the numbers that are there. We also want to produce a different one we had shown earlier that shows more along a function type of thing so that you can see better and better explain what's going on in each of those areas. And we want to produce those also, but we just didn't have time in the last week and a half to put all of those together. So we are planning on having it appears to me, if you take and go back to the report page here, this is what's going to happen just because it's the smallest report and will fit on the report card page. But if you're the parent of a student at, say, go over to the high schools. If you're a student at Richfield and you want a new football field, the first thing I'm going to do is take this and say, what is wrong with you? You're spending $14,000, $14,500 at Cedar Ridge, and we're getting less than $10,000. And they're going to come back with dumb comparisons based on this that aren't going to really be valid, because there's a lot of differences there. Okay, do you understand what I'm saying? So it isn't going to answer.
We're going to break it down by octave as well, because the biggest differentiation is going to be salary and the staffing level.
Yeah, we do have that. On the other one, if you'll remember, it's salary and benefits, and then it has the general object categories going down there. And then when you break it by function, when your function 1,000, your instruction function and salaries, that's teachers' names, okay? That's all that's in there. And so when it's broken by function, it's easier to explain and works better for you guys and helps you to understand it better. So what we need is we need multiple views, because if you just go off of something like this for the whole district and show all of these, it generates a whole bunch of questions that are really moot if you looked at the whole picture. This doesn't tell me how many special ed kids I've got in these two schools. It doesn't tell me if I've got a school that's heavily impacted with ELL students and I've got to break my classes down smaller because or have a lot more English classes. It doesn't tell you anything. Whereas the other one, if you remember, we told about whether it was a Title I school, if they had a low income percentage and a percentage of ELL students. So that kind of helps to explain your population, and you can look at those and see logical reasons why this number is different from this number, or this number is different from this number. Why do they show up that way? What's the difference there? So you guys are going to want to make sure that you have your data in the best way possible. If you want it to show up in the site total, you've got to put the school location on it. If you want it, if you don't care if it shows up down here, anything goes. You know, we've got one district that I did today that they haven't coded anything in school lunch to the school level. So everything in their whole school lunch is all at the district office. And so their numbers up on the school one for the federal is way, way, way low, because it's all in the district office now. So, and when they failed their last bond election because the district office is too cost heavy, guess what? Their citizens are right, because it's all down here, not much up there, at least on paper. They're doing the same thing everybody else is doing, but they're not reporting it, sadly.
So this, as it ties to the NESS discussion, what do we want to be able to look at?
Well, we should be able to.
The other one.
Let's.
There is one weird anomaly in this spreadsheet.
Can you
that
see?
I noticed right off the bat. But
maybe we need to use different colors, but can you see that this is a different color from there?
Yeah, this is a NESS.
And this is a different one from there.
Yeah,
that's because the blue ones are NESS and the black ones are not. And so.
Well, and these are ones we don't. Yeah. So, sorry, that's why I asked. Like these guys are blue. When I asked if you could see the colors, like those are NESS schools.
Okay.
So that we think needs to be pulled out. And
as far as NESS goes, I should be able to look at this number here and say, okay, whoever's the lowest there should be what we're putting into at least every school. The difference here times the number of students up here should at least come up to how much the NESS funding for that LEA is. If I take all of them, the difference is there. Because the board rule on that says that if you go to the rule page, go to 7A and B, 7B says, funds allocated under this rule shall supplement and not supplant other funds allocated to schools by the local board of education. So they can only be, they have to be in addition to the regular stuff. And A under that same section of 7A says a school district shall utilize additional WPU funds allocated for necessarily existing small schools for programs at the school for which the units were allocated. So if it's a NESS school, I should be able to see a cost plus type of bill. Is that an unfair?
But I mean, we have some other, Title I, we have to do the same kind of calculation. Are we spending the same amount at a non-Title I school as we do at a Title I school?
And everybody has to do that same thing.
Yes, we're doing those kind of calculations. Sped, we had one yesterday.
The one thing that rule does, though, is if you were going to hire another FTE, you can't take the dollar.
We can probably share
I didn't
this
realize
with you.
that was there, but you can't take dollars from multiple schools, so you got additional and hire one more FTE at one school.
So you're including federal dollars
which really is
in this, but you're not
Well,
including
and Bond brings
my
us up
out-of-state
to illustrate
students
that the
in
rule
this.
says this, but
That I
we
get
aren't
federal dollars
validating
for.
or checking
We're
this
not
in any way right now.
checking
Salisbury and Richmond High,
Until this year.
they each have about 50 out-of-state students. that need
We
to be added.
couldn't until this year, and we don't have to publish it until next year. We have to give the thing on our report
50
cards this year saying what kind of progress
If you're
we're
including
making
those
towards
dollars, which I
this.
think you are based on.
But next year, for 19, we have to
doesn't really
publish
change
this.
the analysis.
So we'd like to get these out to all of the districts so they can see what their numbers look like. So that if there's things that you need to do to change how your picture looks, that you've got some time to do that and get it going. But you're 5 months into it already, and 4 months into it already, and if you want to change it before the end of the year, you've got to get on it fast.
Yeah, that was my question. So when would we expect, have we already received these, our BAs?
No,
or
no.
when would we expect to receive
Because we
these?
have to manually calculate them all. These guys are manually
Anybody
calculating this
who's
stuff
in
right
this
now.
district, we have them unless you didn't give us school locations. If you don't have school locations, we have 3 large districts that have 1 NESS school each that we haven't done yet.
So I can request my district?
Yeah. Which district?
San Juan.
Okay.
Love to see it.
I can say do that.
So you guys are doing the work, not our guys.
Yes.
We're doing it.
Thank you. Appreciate you.
We want to throw something else on you.
Yes. Well, and that's what we were trying to illustrate yesterday, is that we sent out the rules on what we were planning on doing. The group that came gave a lot of feedback, but we never heard anything else from anyone else, so we moved on.
Yeah.
And that's not to say that they're set in stone, especially as these guys run into issues. We're willing to make adjustments and changes and add clarifications. We haven't programmed anything yet. We don't want to program anything until we know where we want to land.
Yeah, one of the problems that we run into is like with K through 12 schools. So we've got one district where we took and threw it up there, and we went through and did all of that. And at the elementary school, which is, it's
Do you want me to
actually,
bring it up?
Yeah.
sure, bring up the beaver without an A.
Which one do you want first?
No way.
Yeah, this one here. So you can see that we're going along here.
Answer real quick. I want to see this, but in your analysis, did we have challenges with that supplant, non-supplant? So it's not.
We haven't even looked there yet.
So, like,
So we're not able to
Can you tell me how much NESS
determine
is
whether
versus high
a
school?
NESS school has higher cost or not.
We probably, yeah, they do have higher costs. Everyone that we've looked at looks like it's higher.
Okay.
Is it high enough? Doesn't always look like it. But we've only looked at, we've
Well,
been
that's what I'm
so
trying to
busy,
look
we've
at
been
mine
so
right
busy
now.
calculating them that we haven't done any analysis at all.
So that's why I was jumping you ahead, saying, did somebody not jump out yet?
Yeah, one jumps out, but I'm not going to talk about that yet. But we got this one, we pull up this district, and we end up, you can see that they're pretty high on a bunch of them. How do we get to this one with $3,000 per student? And it's a NESS school. How do we get there? What's wrong with this picture? When you get down to it, it's basically a K through 12 school, and the only piece they coded to the high school was the CTE programs. When you pull it up, this is all CTE programs right here that's making up this number. And when you take and put, give it the other one, this was 17,000 right here, but when she pulls up the one where you pull it back in and it's K through 12 school, it's really only 13,000 because you didn't have those high school students in that count and you didn't have all of the programs. So their regular ed teachers weren't in there. They were being counted and divided by the elementary kids. And so it made it look way out of whack. And that's what the artificial dividing of the schools does when it's not, when the salaries and everything aren't divided appropriately with the. So that's one of the problems we've come across so far. Any questions on the school level part? Anything I missed?
That right there is just one of the many issues that we ran across.
Yeah, one of many is
because
an understanding.
One of the things that we run across, and it's not an issue here, but is programs that have school codes that aren't schools.
Yeah.
But there's kids there, are they getting counted twice at their regular school and then counted again at the program?
Yeah, some of
I don't
them.
think we're counting the kids twice. I think they're being divided in the.
Yeah, they're being divided.
We're not funding them twice.
Not funding them twice.
It's like you don't know how to split it up in your accounting record because it's like you're asking something that's not.
But we didn't have any student counts that were partial or decimal places. They were all whole numbers. So I don't think it's looking at it of a kid who's half a day here and half a day here. Because I don't believe that if we ran the whole universe of the state, that not one district's going to come up with a half a student if they're being, or any fraction of a student if they're being allocated places. I think every place where that student takes a class is marking them as a whole student.
Yeah, well, I just think about in Park City, I got I have one high school and then I have a learning center for I have two different codes. But the costs aren't going to look really normal because technically they used to be a school, but now they're not under
now
conditions.
They
and so
some
their
programs.
mashup is like.
Well, and that's what led on to the question is what is a school?
Yeah.
And we're going to have to go through every LEA and determine if there's any programs that needed to be rolled up at a school. We've got preschools with program codes. We've got a whole gamut of things that aren't schools, and they either are going to have expenditures coded to them or not.
Yeah, right
and it's
now,
going to skew this data.
Yeah, I'm going to.
The ones we've seen so far, the preschools are going to end up here in your district number because the number for that school has no K through 12 enrollment in it. So the preschool ends up with a thing that ends up dropping to the district. It makes your district office cost look higher to your public.
We're just so fat up front. No, just the top. That's we just care about ourselves.
You guys keep telling me there's only 1% in administration, but look at these numbers. That tells a different story.
The preschool cost should not be coded to a school?
It shouldn't be it isn't a separate school.
Well, it is part of it.
If they were the preschool inside of an existing elementary.
That would be fine. Put it in the local elementary.
But if we have a preschool sitting off by itself, then it has to go to the district office.
It's like a parent or something.
Vaughn, is there any takeaways that you got after your analysis, and maybe you're not far enough into it yet, that would affect NESS? What did you come up with in this analysis that may affect our discussion?
The thing that would help the most is if we had a NESS program and you used the NESS program to show where your expenditures were, so that we can tell what they were or what they're not. Because right now,
So actually budget NESS to each school that's generating it and spend money out of that program.
just your actual costs. I don't care if you even budget it there. But in the actual use of it in the end, it would help if it had a separate identifying so that you could say, see, here's my NESS expenditures. It's not just
Like if you go back to the spreadsheet, unlike Sevier School District where it was showing us cost per student, I mean the assumption's pretty easy to make. If it's costing me $2,000 more per student at North Sevier High than Richfield, why do I need to account for every one of those costs when it's obvious that those dollars are helping me overcome that increased cost?
Yeah, the only thing that it would do is ease in the calculation of saying,
That it would supplement.
yeah, that it was supplement,
it's there.
not supplant. That you're not,
$9,000 at Richfield High versus
that you've got $600 per student here higher than you do at these schools because they've got the NESS money, so you don't need as much money there, so you're using more of your K-12 at Richfield to give similar type of experiences, but that's the only way we'd ever be able to tell that, is if we had a separate program.
Well, the reality is all we'd be doing is like the class size. We'd just shove enough in there to cover it. So it really wouldn't take anything.
When this,
Bob, can we move on?
when this report comes out next year, is it gonna be a school, just this information for that school is just gonna be on that school's report card? Is this gonna be a district that they can sit there and analyze? I'm just trying to think if I can sneak by this one.
That's the they're going to make their own spreadsheet and put them up side by side.
Okay, I thought so. So I'm just, you gotta have a little humor for heaven's sakes.
And the real problem
Friday afternoon at 3 o'clock, this is pretty dry, you gotta laugh a little bit.
Yeah. The real problem, as I see it, after working with this 37 different states, is that you're going to have advocacy groups like special education that are going to come in and say, see, you're not spending enough on special ed kids, or you need more money in for X group. I need more for ELL students. And it's going to be a war of advocacy groups all fighting against each other for the same $2 that's left.
Resources.
Yeah.
Could be like they're not ground or
So,
something.
go ahead.
So the last thing, I don't know how long we want to go, but what we've been working on is putting the data that we've got from the 2011 study in comparison to what we have now. So, on Sevier, because you're at the top of my list, right? So we have your elementary NESS schools, and these need to be sorted better, sorry. We've got your non-elementary schools and your NESS school. So there's your NESS school. Here was your cost per student in 2011. And these are all squishy. So here are your costs per students in 2017. I don't think I can highlight these, but let me try that.
we had the same 39 students.
Mm-hmm. So
They never graduated.
You're
consistent. They're like 25 years old now.
So to be fair, like I said, this is a work in progress. We've been working on this today. The original cost per student was calculated based on your October 1 head counts. That needs to be on ADM to be consistent to what they did in 11. So Jamie slapped that in here, but we haven't had time to fix the formulas and stuff. So maybe I'll do that right now. ADM's in here, right here. Mm-hmm. So for this school that's not a NESS school, in 2011, your cost per student, which school is this? At Ashman, was $5,804, and this year we're $7,947. So again, we think that these are the base data points that were used to develop the BEL, that were used to develop your curve. So we're trying to plot all of these data points. We would like to get some more non-NESS schools that are districts or LEAs that don't have NESS and put them in here too. And the conversation that I wanted to end with today, unless we want to spend a lot of time going through board rule, I know we've been here for a while, everyone's probably getting tired, we've already talked to Ben and potentially get one of the economists from the governor's office. We want to give them all the same data points, talk to them about the same things we want them to evaluate, and have 3 of them come up with different regressions. I don't know if we're trying to come up with studies, evaluations, information that we can do to help the group make decisions to see if we can replicate what they did in 2011, 2013. But the questions that I have are, what are the data points that we want them to analyze? Do we want them to, going back to this school level information, do we want them to only analyze site level expenditures per school? Do we want the total? Because that captures some of your other functions like lunch services and transportation. Is the goal to make the schools within severe fit closer together? The schools that are NET, or the LEAs that have NESS, fit closer together? I think we feel strongly about keeping the grade band kind of schools, those 3 buckets, separate at least, because elementaries and high schools aren't the same. Like, that's easy, right? So what do we want them to look at? What are your thoughts? We have some people lined up to start working on this once we can crank out the data points. And we'd like to bring some of this information next time. We may use it, we may not, I don't know. We'd like to have them start and see what they can come up with.
One of the things that I think to consider is if you put the full district level, I think it gets diluted. The differentiation between the two gets diluted. Right. Because you're adding more into the overall total to divide by. So I think really, I'm personally leaning toward a site level as being where you look. I don't know. What other things?
That would depend on how well these districts have done at coding expenses at the site level, though.
True. So that's another good point.
So Vaughn, I've got a question. Now, there's certain expenditures in my district that benefit all the schools. So a lot of times I'll just code those to a 999. Is that what?
The program doesn't do that, but if you code them to a 999 location or the district location, then they're going to show up down in the district part.
We'll divvy them out based on head count.
Yeah.
Those 999 will push into the district. Or
not
they'll
the
just
program,
distribute out.
But
whatever you put your location code. So not a program driven location code.
Yeah, and then they'll put them out on this spreadsheet just based on student count.
So if your intent was to prorate them without actually having to prorate them, that's where we want them. Yeah.
Okay.
Which is why we didn't want you to have to hire people to tick off miles and tanks of gas for schools. I mean, that's a waste of time and energy. That's stupid. So,
just let it go flow through.
I don't share my buses anymore.
I agree with what Bruce said, but I think based on how we don't know how well every school district is doing school level reporting, so I think
should we try to run
the data
both
point
ways?
would be total expenditures. I mean, that's so that line that you're on right now.
After your comment, I tend to agree with you that there might be districts that have not broken it out as well by site level, and so that's a concern. There still should be a fairly substantial differentiation between them regardless of whether you include the state or not, or district or not.
So as we're developing the initial regression, which is not the development of the curve, right? What do we want to make severe schools, figure out what it would take to get severe schools equitable within their grade bounds? Do we want to compare all NESSes together? Do we compare everybody to Park City? What?
One of the challenges you have is
what am I comparing against?
If you're going to stay within a district, like for example with our district, we only have one school that's non-NESS and it's an elementary. So you really don't have anything to compare against, especially in this high school, the secondary level. So it becomes difficult. So you're going to have to somehow be able to look outside of many of the NESS districts, and I think there are others that are.
Should we do it like by county classes, population based?
Why do you need a comparison? That would be just justifying that NESS exists as a funding. are we just trying to figure out
It's a
what
good
the
question.
curve is? It's not a comparative analysis at this point. We're just trying to figure out what is the average
Right,
cost,
you're trying to
how
figure-
does it fit in the formula, and what variables do we want to keep.
So my question is, if we calculate an average cost, do I have a data set with average cost for only NESS schools in a district, a statewide average that doesn't have, if you're not NESS, you're not in it, because those might skew, right?
Why
I'm
do
trying-
you need those data points?
Because Randy told me he wants them. We sat down with Randy Raphael. We're gonna sit down with Thomas and potentially the economist of the governor's office and talk through what we want them to analyze. And so that's the question that I'm asking you. What do you want us to give them? What do you want us to analyze?
I think the problem, though, to me is we're going to go through all this analysis, and our goal is still education. And I would just bet, I mean, Chad's saying he tries to allocate that to those 2 other schools to get as close as he can. If you sit down and look at the class offerings of Richfield versus North Sevier, even though he's putting more money into North Sevier, the class offerings at Richfield are far superior. So we're going to go through all this analysis, and maybe you have to for the money, but if we're talking education, we're only looking at one piece, because even with the NESS money, and if, Chad, if you'll send that up, there's no question. A kid at Richfield has more opportunity than a kid at North Sevier, even though you're spending more money at North Sevier. So we're going through an exercise here that only shows one piece of the puzzle. And it's not the most important piece. The most important piece should be the education piece. So we're trying to do what we can to make it more equal. But, you know, in my area, and I'm up there by myself, but there's no way a kid at Rich High School has the same opportunity at the 4 schools that are in Cache County. They can go to any school in Cache County and have significantly more offerings. And so we do all this analysis. I'm afraid we might be shooting ourselves in the foot, because what we should be talking about is education. So somehow we got to tie that together, because we do all this and they're going to say, oh, looky here, they're spending more money and they're not getting any better results. Well, hell no, we're not going to get better results, because the opportunities aren't there. But we're trying to equalize it some way, to some extent. You know, Altamont's not getting the same course offerings that Richfield High is. But, you know, the argument back to that is, well, they choose to live in Altamont. They do. But the parents make that choice, not the kids. So we're doing what we can to try and equalize it. And when we turn kids into numbers, we're making mistakes.
But I still think you have to be careful that it's an equal opportunity to a basic education, not an equal opportunity to every educational experience that's in the state of Utah. That's
probably the richest rancher in Rich County was on my board and is now off. And the best advice he gave me when he left the board was, figures lie and liars figure. And I think that's exactly what we're talking about here. You know, just like he pointed out, did the numbers create the regression formula, or the regression formula create the numbers? Well, hell, this is what you want it to say. But the point is, we got to be talking about education, not this. Now, we got to justify it. I agree. I'm not in your spot, Natalie. But, boy, if we get down this road and they start having some aha experiences, it's going to kill small schools, folks. Because
I think it's hard to do comparisons, because you start, even within NESS districts it's hard, but you start picking districts that aren't NESS schools, and you're picking some city districts. I think inherently, even without, I just think the rural schools are going to cost. How do you even compare that when?
So you know that's how they did the basis of the regression initially, was figuring out the differential between your NESS schools and your non-NESS schools within Sevier's district.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm bringing it up for. Is in the original data set, that's what they used.
I think
I don't think it compared Sevier to Paiute. or Kane. I think it compared severe to severe.
No, I think that makes, that's why
Yeah.
in the last meeting I said, let's make sure we're looking at districts within district. You start
Right.
even comparing me to San Juan. San Juan's gonna always cost more than Severe because just transportation alone. They're busing kids way more many miles than I am, eating up their WPU dollar, more of their WPU dollar that I don't have to.
So here's the original, and I don't know if we sent this to you, so we'll send this to you this afternoon too if you want to look at it. So here was the original. We came up with this, with those comparison sheets based on what was given to us from the last work group. We went back through and recalculated. So here's Cashurum, right? Cashurum and Severe. That was your ADM. That was your expenditures per school in 11. I think these are 2011 numbers. I think they did that in 13 using 2011 data, right? So here's a district average cost per student. And they went through a calculation of how much it costs, more it costs you, or how much the differential is between what you were contributing to this school versus your district-wide average. And that's how they came up with this small school WPU number. And we're not sure if that was the basis of the curve. Like that's the kind of analysis that we're talking through, is maybe if we put these in, we could replicate what they did. I mean, we don't know unless we try, right?
I think that's...
Because we want it to be as true and as comparable to this data set. What I don't know is how did we get to cost per student? I don't know if every LEA in this analysis used the same methodology because we don't have the data. We don't know if they included transportation and capital. We don't know what they put in there because I have a number, I don't have a formula or a data set.
I think I know what they use because I have those original spreadsheets. But
Pretty simple spreadsheet, with a few data points, a few costs, and tried to summarize that.
I think everything was included, but capital and debt were not included.
So our thoughts for next steps, I mean, I don't know if everyone's tired, do you want to keep going? It's Friday. Our thoughts for next steps were to work through this. Do we want to have another meeting? Like what are our feelings? Our thoughts were trying to come to an answer about eligibility and what we thought eligibility should or shouldn't be. Work on this data set, work our way through the rule and statute, and talk through what we think we might need to make proposals to change. Ben, what are your thoughts?
Well, I've been sitting here listening, and I'm like, it does seem we have a scope problem. It hasn't been very well defined as to what we've been asked to answer. And I don't know at this point if that's a question of the State Board of Education or the legislature or both. Because I don't really see that the two issues coming together, even sitting here and talking more, because they're almost completely divergent. There's one where you're basically, the status quo is fine. It distributes the money, or we can adjust it to distribute the money. But then there's the question from the policymaker's side, as opposed to, well, how do we know that this is doing what it's supposed to be doing? Well, what is it supposed to be doing? And so do we just stop and pull back and say, we need more direction from policymakers on what you want this to do? Do you want new regression models made that go through and actually mirror what's happening in the schools? Do you want to basically, I brought it up as turning this into a student-based formula, getting rid of regressions altogether, but finding a way to weight those to where you get, so there are a myriad of things that can go on, but at this point we can't fix the underlying problem with the regression formula without additional data and without additional work to try and understand the cost differentials within those. Well, that gets us to the question, well, we can't fix the question that we've been really here come to ask, so do we need to do anything more until that more direction comes? I don't know. And I don't know what I would tell lawmakers at this point.
To talk to their BA. That's what they should do.
He's here. And can I just make one more editorial comment? I've said way too many editorial comments. But I don't think, again, we're all here representing rural schools. Don't lose sight of the fact that one of the things pushing this is some legislators that say at committee meetings that it shouldn't matter what your zip code is, it should be the same amount of money. Now, that's been said, and when they say it, they're thinking the difference between Canyons and Jordan. But that's not what it means when you say it literally. So it's said all the time, and again, that argument comes up every legislative session, so as we go through this, I think we got to have that bigger picture in mind, is let's not lose what we've got and open ourselves to zip code funding, because that would kill us. And it would be wrong for kids. But if your only issue is Jordan and Canyons, that's your purview. That's a whole different purview than we're coming from. So I appreciate what Ben's saying. I think maybe we've dealt with the allocation part of it. So that's, I think, something we can do, justify and everything else. Ben and Natalie are caught in another discussion. I think we better start having that discussion with ourselves so that we can, you've done a great job with the money distribution part, but we better start thinking about the other part, because that's where we might get eaten. Sorry, that's the end of my editorial comment.
Was there enough clarity when, because I just heard the statement that it's broke. Can we go back and determine what was broke? Did the district say it was broke because the money wasn't making it to them? Did legislators say it was broke because it wasn't meeting its objective? Is it broke because the state board staff are having difficulties administering, and it's because I've heard broke, but I don't know what to.
Well, and I think it's broke depending on who you talk to.
It's all of those.
And yeah, and because
I think that's what we got stuck with is the phrase broke, but you as I ask, broke means fill in the blank.
And really, you know, there's an initial broke, and then there's digging in and trying to fix that broke. And I would say that's the regression for, and then discovering that things have happened at different times in the past 20, 30 years, 40 years of this formula that have taken it away from, and there's just really there's nothing written down on what's supposed to happen, why it was changed. And so recreating that almost does require to pull the thing apart and put it back together. And if that's what they want to do, and if that's what they want to task us with, that's much different than I think what we're looking at here. But to say it's broke, you know, because there's the broke of the formula, regression formulas, there's the broke in the funding isn't being distributed, but then there's also the other political brokes as far as this is distributing a lot of money to certain schools. Are they getting it to even compared to other non-NESS schools? And charters, you know, there are people out there that say it's broken. You're getting more money than is needed to operate a school because they're coming from that context, so they see that the formula is broke. And then finally, the big one is no one can understand it and no one can explain it.
So who was the initial charter of this exercise? Was it the state board asking it?
I think it came from the committee because...
Well, there's two pieces. We've long been concerned about the fact that we're not in compliance with statute and rules.
I'm just trying to figure out who to take this
happened?
back to, whether we're talking now, this is a task force thing with a bunch of legislators.
So really the catalyst, coming out of the committee, the catalyst for this was really our board. You know, was really leadership. I mean, Chair Huntsman, you know, I would say he probably has the most NESS schools in his district. You know, and so he gets a lot of feedback, and he was saying, yeah, it's all of the above. He was getting input that it's broke, that the state office isn't distributing all the money, so it's broke. this was never a problem before. There's not enough money, and this was never a problem before, and so now we're just trying, because, and we'll say this, because I think what's great success with the To From work group, they said they'd do a NESS work group too. And we were going to try to do them both simultaneously, and that just did not, we couldn't get, calendaring, it just wouldn't work. So we focused on To From, and now we're focused on this. So it did come out of committee. Our board members, though, are, saying, and we update them, we tell them how many meetings we've had and where we're at. And I think Ben has articulated where we're at pretty well right now. So
yeah, I'm just trying to figure out who the next authorizer is. It's like, hey, we've done it twice.
Yeah.
We've teased out all these myriad of issues.
Right.
Give us direction on how fast and furious do we run with this, or
well, and I think there's
you're the wrong work group because this is now a policy discussion. It's not a mechanics discussion.
Yeah. Well,
break it down into pieces.
And we could, we can always bring in the policy like Angie or to help with that if that's what we want, where we want to go. I mean, policy at our level, right? Code.
Yeah, because I see when the legislature gets pulled together, it's a policy conversation, not so much getting into the nitty gritty of formula, other than is it rational? But they're going to grapple with the policy conversations.
Well, and we were charged to go through every formula and identify issues that we felt needed to be addressed. Sure. Is everything appropriately in statute and rule? Are we in compliance with statute and rule? I'd rather tell my board that we're not in compliance than have the auditors tell them. I mean, right now I don't see a way that we can resolve that on our end.
So it's a question that we need to make recommendations as far as what changes in statute and rule would need to be made to bring what we're doing into compliance, or is it that we're trying to validate the formula and move on from there? Those are the kinds of questions I'm grappling with is where we're going, because it would be, if the one issue is just trying to distribute the money and dot the I's across the T's, you can make a few minor changes in proposals anyway from the committee in either board rule and or statute and move on. Or if we're trying to validate it, we got a lot of more work to do, and it probably would end up with a redistribution of funds in the end, which is going to be politically an issue with legislators that are in NESS districts anyway. So it's going to fall back to the politics one way or another.
Can I make a comment? Sure. I'm looking at a paper that I think Ben might have written back in 2014. He comments in here about the legislators had raised 3 questions, it looks like. Given recent increases in total appropriation for the NESS program, are NESS qualifying schools receiving all the appropriated funds? So that was one of the questions, and I think we've talked about ways that all those funds can be distributed. Question number 2, what guarantees are in place to ensure that NESS qualifying schools actually receive NESS allocations from school districts? And I guess we could talk about that, but in my district, I have a program that I put the NESS money in and I allocate it to the schools that generate it. I do that. You can look at my books and see that, and if there was a separate program on the APR to show that, it would show it. Question number 3, why are some NESS qualifying schools receiving less funding in light of recent increases in the total appropriation for the program? So back in 2014, it looks like maybe those were the 3 main questions that legislators have, and I think we've answered those pretty good, or suggested ways that those could be answered.
In part. And I would say that was probably the beginning of the questions into NESS. We can answer the first and third questions fairly well. We cannot answer the second question on a statewide basis independent of your input, or me going in and into a financial report and pulling that out.
Correct. Right, I agree.
And so I think that's the part where we're hitting. And this question that Vaughn was putting in, I think enhances that, because that's exactly what I would do. Is I would call Vaughn and say, once the school level reporting is coming through, how is this coming out? And then I would look at NESS schools. We have a list of NESS schools, and their funding better be this much higher than every other district in the school. And if it's not, then I'd have to say, well, that money's not getting to them. I mean, you have to kind of look at it, what's available on a statewide basis for someone outside of your internal accounting system to be able to replicate and prove what you're doing. And at this point I can't, so I would say number 2 needs additional work. But
Yeah, even in that scenario though, there could be, there's going to be weird. Yeah, I mean, you could have one school that's got brand new staff, just like what Derek brought up the other day. One school with brand new staff, and another school with 30 years teachers.
And I don't envy any of you as this starts getting rolling out. And particularly, I think it will fuel the debate in Salt Lake City and Ogden school or in Granite school districts about the share of costs between east and west side. It's going to perpetuate that, and it's going to come into your districts in some way, because that's what people in your area are going to do. Is they're going to go to these reports, they're going to pull information together, and there's always a backstory to it, like salaries, special ed, all of those, but no one's going to be able to prove that based on the data provided.
In my budgets, I allocate special ed money to the schools based on how they generate it, but that's not how I spend it. I spend it where the need is, and we end up spending a lot more in some schools than what they generate, than what they have generated.
Yeah.
But that
So
will
maybe just kind of think how
it generates per kid.
A person who thinks they're a wonk in your district is going to put this together and try and come up with an answer of saying why because I think it will start happening. And that's what, there's been a significant group of people on the education committees over time that have wanted to do this. I would say the state auditor is one of the main ones. He wants to get down to the class level to be able to compare the cost of English, 9th grade English in this school to the cost of 9th grade English in this school, and then ask you why.
90% of it's going to come down to salary.
the whole answer in life, and I'm not an educator, I'm a number cruncher, but it's the teacher.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
right. When you look at it,
I don't think it's how many papers you buy or how many pencils.
Right. 85% of everything goes to pay people to do
We're
something.
arguing over 10, 12% of the total.
But you have
cost.
people out there that are going to be doing this. So this is kind of a diversion from our main question, but these are all leading into that. Anyway.
One of the challenges that we have, though, on the question, that second question that you're asking, is we've never had data to be able to look at before. So I think it would be hard to come in and say, well, the school's $100 shy of what their generation is. You're going, well, how could I fix that when I didn't know the number? So that's another issue that we've got.
And basically, it kind of comes back to what Vaughn says.
Right.
As long as in the total you're more than what the NESS is, then at least I can say an argument could be made that the NESS money went there.
Right.
It could be some other money, but you can at least make the argument that it's that much more.
Right. You're putting local money in addition to that.
Yeah.
But there may be a few cases where it's slightly under that we need time to make adjustments to. Well, I don't know if this first year, if everything's going to be even accurate to me. It's going to take a while to work through it, so people know what they're doing and reporting.
On that happy note,
I think we don't want to let it go, but we don't know where to hand it off to. But it's important enough to not let it disappear into the ether.
I mean, on the base level, this group was brought together at the direction of the board.
That's at least our first report back.
So I can take these questions back to them, scope question, you know, go from there.
So at a minimum, try to get to an authorization to work the formula appropriately each year as we need to, distribute the money.
Well, but you've also got the eligibility issue, which may or may not be resolved with a very small change if you need to be in statute where it just says new schools, or well, it's an interpretation board rule of the statute saying. I don't know which one it has to be.
No, it would
I hate to
take
put the word
statute.
task force out there, but.
You would take a statute change.
Yeah, it's your school configuration is a statute question. Everything else is a board rule question, really. Just put it.
Right.
I think we're all clear on that.
Which would suggest that the work group recommendation is if we want to maintain status quo, we have a statutory question. Can we add a couple more scenarios to the list of 4? Can there be a K-12? Now, we got to figure out what the regression looks like if we're going to use regression or some linear formula, how that gets funded. But just can we have this category to figure it out? Give us the category, and then still let it run through the board rule process of what does the regression look like? Tell us K-12 starts at 0 and goes to 700, or it goes to 30. Or, give us the parameters like we have for every other group. Because it's really the bottom and the top is all that's in the statute.
My experience is they generally ask the board group or the board for a recommendation.
So the status quo thing is we need a K-12 scenario. And we need another mixture of a middle school scenario. So those would be the hold on. Again, the assumption is maintain status quo. We have to ask for that. No, there's no illegality about that. We got to ask for the scenarios that we have today. They may not fly.
We have to just run off the K-12. Like if you create this K-12, kind the K-8 just run off that.
Rule of whether
you just have, it's essentially the same thing. You just have less students, most likely.
But I think you'd have to be careful. You have a lot of K-8s that aren't NESS, and if your ADM is too low or too high, you might bring more people in.
There's always a thing too about whatever gets decided, there's the 2 words, winners and losers, right? When that starts getting said, like there's winners and losers, that's where we lose them. We lose all the, because, you know, whichever, you know, so if we, whatever.
Say in the OLAG audit, we have a bunch of losers because we were told that we're out of consensus.
Right. Yes. Exactly. And so if there's an audit that occurs here, you know, I mean, you know, there's pushes to have the OSA, if the state auditors come in and audit this, to say, go in and do it. We're not, you know.
Go tell us what's broken. What we're up.
Yeah.
We'd still have to fix it when they're done.
We still have to fix it.
Regardless. They're going to tell you exactly what we've been telling you right now. I mean, it's not going to be any different.
Or
it might be worse.
So how do you, 3 or 4 or 5, really feel if, I mean, we just come up with that recommendation that you go to your board and say the recommendation is that we fix the formula to distribute the money, take care of these statutory requirements for K-12, K-8 school, which that might be a bigger ask than, you know, bigger task than what it seems like, because that, you know, but is that an okay, I mean, can we end at that? And say that's what this committee has come up with?
I think so, and if they, well, on some level, and if they go, yeah, we really think we need these, then that adds these answers to opening up a new group.
Opinion. I want something in writing saying that it's okay for me to fudge a number.
No, I agree.
Well, I'm not doing it until it's in writing.
Right. And so if they go through and say, okay, yeah, but we understand we have a need for these additional regression formulas, and so that changes the conversation here. Because in order, like I said, in order to do those new regression models, you have to do all of them. And it changes the part of our discussion.
They'll say, do it all. Do all the...
At least then we have direction.
So one,
6-year versus 3-year.
you got the issue of 2 3-year schools versus a 6-year school, some split in the same building. Yeah, same issue, but if you could raise the 6-year up so that it matches the curve of the 3 years, now that's the same money either way, but that's several $1 million to do that as well. So, not an easy solution to any of these, but if we had could we get a good list of the issues that are inherent in there so we can dig into
We have one
those?
somewhere that we created already.
That list of issues was originally coming out of the committee. The chair and the board members asked, well, list the issues out for us, so we did. And so we went to the work group.
Right.
So we'll take it back to exactly what we just said here. I anticipate those. Yeah, okay. Yeah. Do all the regression formulas. And come back to us with a code change recommendation, a rule change recommendation.
So you want the group to provide written recommendations?
Yeah, I
to the
think
board?
that would help, that way. Yeah, so what you could do is we could start like a draft about capture what we just said here, and then we could probably squeeze it into the board meeting next week. If we get it, probably by, I know. Okay, December maybe, so.
Remember, we have WPUs to do this.
I know, okay. All right, so probably December, and then, so we probably wouldn't meet. We put all the recommendations together for December, so we probably wouldn't meet until after the first year. But then here's the other piece to this too. A lot of this they're gonna expect to be resolved before the legislative session starts, right? So time-wise, time will be, it's not already, time is quickly becoming the enemy. But because there's
we did have a question early on whether this was trying to get fixed this legislative session.
Yeah. Well,
and I don't know that we
I don't
see that time, because otherwise.
Well, I think that's expecting.
Yeah, we don't have a statutory date required anymore.
We have to have a good answer. It may
Sure.
not be the solution.
We wanted to make some substantial progress towards identifying our issues.
So I think if we got to what the recommended statute change is, I think they'd be fine.
But at least we
Or if we
identified
don't
it.
have it at that point, then we can brief it at some point during the session. That's where we're at, and it's, can be at that, I think we'd be okay. But, Ben and I can check.
So it's my understanding that we don't need the November 20th meeting, and we're just going to put together a recommendational document for the December board meeting?
Let's do that, unless anybody else.
Well, I hate meetings, but I think we ought to look at the recommendations before it goes to the board meeting.
Oh, definitely.
Not that I don't, but we need to have that discussion, because I'm not sure we're all exactly on the same page. If you get the recommendations, then we can sit down and hash them out and make sure at least we're all saying the same thing. Nothing worse than a recommendation going for the committee and half the committee is in favor and half the committee is against, because we're not understanding what we're saying.
Yeah, early December meeting.
Well, we have a meeting scheduled right now for the 20th of November, which would be plenty of time to get something ready for the December board. Yeah. So you want us to keep the meeting with the objective of having recommendations?
I think we need that, because there's nothing worse than us getting there and saying, no, that's not what we said. We at least ought to, now whether we agree with what we said or not, it's a different discussion, but at least we ought to know what we said.
Different opinion for 25 days.
I have the afternoon.
So we'll meet to go over the recommendations in a few weeks. She got you the annotation.
So if it's basic, simple things, probably could just be a board rule change. If it's major overhaul, then it's got to go back to legislature.
Well, if we get into the K-12 issue, that's going to be statutory.
I think we're headed statutory. Status quo is the goal. We gotta go there.
Because it defines.
So for me, like you said earlier, elementary, secondary are very different scenarios. How strongly do you feel you need a K-12 versus just using the two?
I think someone needs to tell me what to do with K-12 if we don't have new scenarios.
Or just if at least got approved by the state board that yes, it's appropriate to use the two.
But it would have to be a statutory change, like that's in statute. So if our recommendation was we just split K-12.
I think the risk of saying status quo is that we're saying we're not going to change anything, right? So,
Well, they don't play with you about students.
Careful
There's
about that.
no basis.
Yeah, and I think we have recommended change, so it's not status.
Right.
Yeah.
So even where we're at now in the agreement,
Status quo is
percentage changes and so forth.
I guess I'm still hung. Ben made the comment of if we go down the K-12 road, we have to, sorry to keep the meeting going, we have to blow up all the formulas and start over, but why do we have to do that if we just go down the road he's suggesting and just say, oh, let's just use the formulas we already have for the K-12 scenario and make it work?
Because in theory, at least I'm just thinking base, you introduce a new distribution model. And you have the same number of WPUs. I mean, in theory, it would be the same, but
well, I'm saying,
how do you create a new...
Let's just do what we're doing, but make it fit within the law.
Yeah, but how do you... So I guess you could go change the law and say, for a K-12 school, you add B and C together, or whatever it is.
So essentially, we're not changing anything.
Or can you actually do that in board rules as it will use the regressions for the respective school scenarios, which is kind of what we do now, but don't do the double base thing.
That would be the best case.
You would take, okay, I have a K-12 school, I have grades K through 6, they are 380 M. I better pick a smaller number. They're 180 M.
150.
Yeah.
It's gotta be under
I blew it out of the water. And so you apply the formula to that, those data points. Hey, it's those 6 grades, they have 180 M. Boom, you landed on the regression curve here, that's your funding. Oh, you have grades 7 through 12, that's a 4-year school. That's a statutory scenario. How many ADM are in that one? Boom, hit them on their curve. And we've met the spirit of the statute, which is you had an elementary school and you had a secondary school. They happen to be co-located. There's no prohibitions or encouragements of co-location, but that's a fact. But we address the formula to the specific elements that match the statute, and then we're done.
Yeah,
we're
Take out the base for the second one.
Yeah.
Now, when you're saying base,
I don't think there is technically a base.
So you're just an automatic 10 WPUs.
No, wait, let's hold on right there.
Yeah.
As soon as you get to 11 students, that base is gone.
Yeah, but if now you're saying it's a K-12.
Yeah, and you have more than 11, it doesn't matter.
No, you got, so
you're gonna hit your curve, you're gonna hit where you are.
I'll say you got 100 elementary, 100 high school. Both of those are beyond 10. There's no 2 bases. You're just middle of the formula, picking up so many students per, so many WPUs per student for each of those. There's no artificial adding in extra bases. That only happens 10 and below. Once you hit 11, you're on the curve. You're not artificially doubling up a base.
The only problem area is the less than 10 school that applies. Otherwise, we're deep into the formula. Life's good. There is no.
So I saw K-12 with 20 students.
Say that again, Vaughn?
IBAPA, you've got 20 students.
Oh, okay.
So right now, so it's okay because it's
so right now.
So small, they need every
No,
dollar
but
they
it's
can
under
get.
2, so if I have exactly 10 students in each one.
No, 7 through 12 is going to be less than 10.
So right
So
now.
that one would get 2 bases, but very well justified. There's still.
The only thing I can think that would come back on you for that is that, in theory, if you're going to go to a K-12 school, there should be some cost savings associated with that, and should that then be reflected in here? Because you're going from 2 100 schools to 1 200 school, which in theory should provide you some economies there.
This goes back to my earlier comment though, is it a big enough issue there's
Statewide.
insignificant to the whole pie that we just say, yeah, there's, but we make it work in the understanding that, yeah, it's a little screwy.
So D, if you had less than 10 students in your case, in your elementary, I guess it comes in your K-12, but in your elementary, less than 10 in your high school, you have 2 bases.
Would be artificially held at the 10. Yeah. That would
Which
be
I have had at Bullfrog sometimes. Right now, we're with 10 in the elementary and 11 in the high school. Right now.
At that level, very easy to justify that much money going to those schools. That's why the 10 base is there. Yeah, I wouldn't come up with any formula that would give you any less in that scenario.
Right.
If we do anything, those are gonna be the first place that would increase in the formula, I would think. 'Cause those very smallest ones getting more money than right off the top from anybody else.
I'd say you're probably not out of compliance with statute. What is the challenge with qualifying someone based on minutes on the bus?
So on the issue of economies of scale in one building, if you're using the elementary and the K6 or the elementary and the 6 year, I guess it's just the 6 year versus 2-3 years. The 6 year is so much smaller. It's covering more grades, and it is a lot less money as well. So there is built into the formulas already less money for a larger consolidated school.
But when you look at the totals, if you add an elementary school and a 4-year secondary school, that gives you a total enrollment that maximizes our highest WPU weighting amount. It goes from 600 to 660, right?
Yeah, in that scenario, you could qualify up to 660 kids. Using the formula, is that what you're saying?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. The issue is that would never happen.
Yeah.
An elementary that has 160 kids in it feeds 160 kids into a high school. It'd be very unlikely in that rural area you would ever get to more than 300 kids in those combined.
I can accept that, but I don't know whether that meets a statutory statutory requirement for writing a law. We'd have to bring our attorneys into that because they want to, at least in my experience with them, is that would become a question. Because you're technically expanding at that point the number of kids or the total number of WPUs that would be allowed under the formula.
Because you're splitting it, and so now it's, where this is saying this is maximum.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the same issue with the 2-3 years, you're now at 900.
Yeah, so should
instead of 600.
A K-12 school really be, I don't know, somewhere around 250? I'm just throwing that number out, I don't know what that would be. But to say that that school is 660 is much different than saying this school is 160 and this school is 500.
I think the other mitigating factor, the regression curves aren't the same curve.
Mm-hmm.
So your 160 aren't generating the same amount. Not as though you were 660 on the bigger curve. So now it's a dollars question as opposed to a WPU.
I say this and I don't have an answer, obviously.
Yeah. I'm just trying to throw out an idea to say that we're not out of compliance.
So that's the overlying total limitation we have, is that without $5 to $10 million new dollars, we can't fix any of this. We're pretty much stuck
we
with,
can redistribute.
without redistribution, yeah. Either bring some of the lower ones up or redistribution, and nobody wants to touch that, so.
Nobody at our level wants to touch it. People at his level
Right.
want to touch
You
it.
guys can
I think we need to go down the road Todd's saying is,
Yeah.
we need to try to fix what we can in board rule to make it so that we're compliant with statute. So how can we,
And I think
how can
Natalie,
we tweak board rule to do that?
and that's where Natalie's at. If we could do that, at least she wouldn't be under the gun that she's facing.
Well, if you want, we can, next thing, I can put the board rule up and we can reword it. I mean, if that's, then I can take that back to, well, I'd have to do the policy, the board rule process.
But I think at our next meeting, that would be a great thing.
Okay.
Okay, you come with recommendations.
Well,
How
yeah,
we
so
can-
let's send you the rule, right? And then you give us your ideas on how to write it to where it fits the statute, and maybe we just knock it out of the box next meeting. Because we won't be able to take anything back to the board until their December 6th meeting, so. That way.
I like that. I mean, that's the feel I get from
Okay.
my people on my
Okay.
side is something like that, and I think that's what Superintendent Lamborn's kind
Let's
of
just do that then.
too.
And then that way too, because that process always draws out so what are the second and third level effects of when this rule goes into place? What will the BAs have to do? What will the, superintendents have to do?
Yeah, and I think it does a significant thing for us as we go back to our people.
Yeah.
Because they haven't been part of this discussion.
Okay.
And they're gonna say, well, why didn't you just keep status quo? Well, we were thinking status quo on redistributing the money. It's a much bigger issue than that. Here's what we had to deal with to get in compliance with statute. Then when we go back to our people, we can articulate something instead of them saying, well, we just told you to go get status quo. Well, it wasn't possible under statute.
Right.
And here's what we did to come in compliance. And we still kept the distribution curve as close as we could. I don't think we're going to change that significantly. I think we can, I don't know if it's the right word to sell it, but we can explain it and make it palatable. And palatable to Natalie and Scott, which has to happen too.
So one of the big issues on reworking the board rule to be would be, well, it's
Combination.
is the second distribution, right? Or I guess that's still,
I think we're too late this year to not do the second distribution.
we've got to overcome that hurdle though. Like that's a big hang up with legislators is that there's carryover. So even though we're in compliance with board rule, that's still, we need to rework board rule
Distribute it out initially.
to distribute it initially.
Yeah, that is a moot point.
It's an issue with legislators because
I still think you could just do the rule and then it would come out anyway.
Bingo.
Yeah, in there, because it's in statutes. There.
So,
It's in the second distribution. Oh, right there. 9A.
Yeah, but if you ever get there, you never.
Oh, I'm looking at the statute, not the board rule. 9A.
so where it's in the statute.
We never happen to us.
It's just do the rule.
Get the rule, so we never has to get your statute.
So let's try that. Let's try that on November 20th. Let's just go at the rule.
So our job is to talk to our people.
Come up with ideas on how to revise the rule to allow for the
Do you want those
distribution.
sent in advance and to them?
Yeah, that would help.
Yeah, that would help. So the meeting's November 20th. If, how much lead time before the 20th? would you recommend?
Friday before the third.
So what is that? Is that 17th?
When's the 30th?
Look, Friday before.
Could be anything.
20th.
It's the 16th.
16th. So if you could get them to us on the 16th, we'll package
It's a
them.
Tuesday, not a Monday.
Put them in. Then we can just work it. We can work through and.
You can put up everyone's suggestions.
Right, yeah. We'll
Put
start
them all in
there.
one document, look it up, each
Time
together.
on the 16th, I don't seem to have them.
20th.
On the 20th.
Oh, it's the 20th?
Yeah, no, we're saying to turn in all your ideas on the rules by the 16th.
By the 16th, which is the Friday before. The meeting's on the 20th.
It's at
And
one.
that gives you guys enough time.
What time on the
Tuesday, Monday,
20th?
One before.
We could probably have it before that to each other on Friday.
It'd be great if you could get them before that. That would be super
Yeah,
fantastic.
at the latest. Can we say at the latest?
But we're not asking you guys to assimilate it all in trains.
No.
No, if you guys
No,
come up with
yeah,
one.
because it would be beneficial to us all, whoever tells our
Speak from
board,
one document.
right, that we speak from one document and everyone signed off on it, yeah.
That's the thing.
So you do have a list of all your concerns and issues and that you can send out to us? You could study
Yeah, we
it.
can start back there and then that.
You can dig into those a little bit too.
Okay.
We already have all the applications, so we know the anomalies we're looking at.
Yeah, we sent you all that stuff. You have
We had
the,
the current out, we had 18.
That might just be the solution.
yeah, the distributions by school are in that spreadsheet that we sent out as well.
So in the November meeting, I'll tell them that's the plan. I'll tell the board that the plan is to meet on November 20th. We're gonna go at the rate.
Sounds okay.
Anything else?
Friday. Now we're.
Oh, I just hope traffic isn't bad south.
That was an hour ago.
Only a couple hours. Traffic's okay. 3 or 3.5 if traffic's bad.
Once you get past South Jordan, it should be fine.
Lehigh and where?
You guys, once you get past Lehigh, shouldn't be too bad.
What is it?
I see some problems with that. I see so many emails.
I'm trying not to email you guys.
What's up?
If I don't email you, when I think about emailing you, I forget to email you, so.
Makes me feel bad.
You'd have to like.
Yeah,
It's a busy time of year trying to
Long will you send me that?
get systems up and going, and I got budget, I got mid-year, I got.
I wouldn't dare fly with myself.
Straight off your head.
Yeah, I do. I mean, I have a whole spreadsheet. I do the same thing. Just for accessing calls.
I think effectively maybe yesterday, maybe Robert did.
Oh, yeah.
As of yet.
We're playing right now. I can't.
What the heck? You see that score?
Yellow. Shoot the email.
I have 34 old games.
I heard we were getting
Scott.
I've just gotten.
I'll take it. Thank you. Are you okay with that? We figured it would be easier and then you wouldn't have the time issue.
It's fine. Could you
Like the new coach down there's got
give me a copy or send me a copy?
You want one right now?
Yeah, right now would be good.
So we have to put this on the board agenda for approval, but we'll pay the administrative, we'll pay the
They've made people.
contractor, and then they cut you a check for the indirect costs yesterday, so it'll be in your allotment.
Find out.
Sorry.
Oh.
Thanks, Jamie.